the 24th, 2023. Melissa, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Rios,
Here.
Vice Chair Guida,
Here.
Member Aguilar Medrano.
She's on Zoom, I believe.
Okay, is she on Zoom, Heather? Okay, Member Berkeley,
Here.
Member Beachside.
Here.
Member Bienvenue.
Here.
Member Larson.
I believe she's excused.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda, staff? Board members? Heather,
Chair Rios, item number 1 under old business, item G, 220 Rodriguez Street will be postponed until the next.
any other changes?
There are no other changes.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as just changed?
Guida, so moved.
Beachside seconds.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Medrano. Okay, Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Beachside,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion has been approved.
Thank you. We have minutes of January the 10th, 2023. Are there any changes to these minutes? Melissa, I have 2 of them that are quick. The first one is on page 11, paragraph 3. Should read as follows. Chair Rios asked staff the difference and then take it to where it says except under Portales. You should add the words under Portales. Okay, and then on page 28, 5th paragraph down, should read, Chair Rios asked Mr. Martinez to confirm that what was being proposed is, okay, that what was being proposed, and then the rest of the sentence is okay. Any other changes?
Chair Rios,
Yes.
member Aguilar Medrano has her hand up.
Oh,
Feel free to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I just was able to join as a panelist. I'm sorry you guys couldn't hear me for roll call. But 2 quick changes on page 11, paragraph 11. If you can change the 3rd sentence to read, while it is on the new edition, it doesn't complement the style of the existing house, which is Spanish Pueblo Revival. And the second change is in that same paragraph, continued on page 12. If you can change the second to last sentence to read, she noticed the existing windows only have muntins on the interior. The packet states that all new windows will have muntins on the exterior and interior, and asked if the existing windows will be retrofitted to have muntins on the exterior as well. And that's all. Thank you.
thank you very much, Member Aguilar Medrano, and you're coming in loud and clear, which I love. Are
Perfect. Thank you.
there no further changes? Is there a motion to approve these minutes as just amended?
Guida, so moved.
Is there a
Aguilar
second?
Medrano seconds.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Beachside,
Abstain.
Member Bienvenue,
Abstain.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. We have no findings and conclusions on this particular agenda. So we'll move on to matters.
Chair Rios, I just wanted to let the board know that to pass along my apologies that we don't have edited findings of fact and conclusions of law from the H board meeting that we had on January 10th. On a somewhat of an emergency basis, I have been called in to cover for the municipal prosecutor, Kyle Hibner. So I have been spending most of the week and most of the past 3 weeks covering for the municipal prosecutor and municipal court. Mr. Hibner is taking FMLA leave because he is the proud father of a new baby girl, and I'm happy to help out there. But nonetheless, it is time consuming, and I haven't been able to address the findings of fact and conclusions of law. I hope to have all those done by the time we meet on February 14th.
Thank you, Attorney Rubelit, for letting us know that.
You're welcome.
And good luck on the other side that you're representing.
Hey, thank you very much.
Any matters from the public? Anyone wishing to speak at this point? Anyone on Zoom? There is no one, so we'll move on to staff communications.
Chair Rios, just to bring to your attention at the end of the agenda, we're going to be having a staff discussion. I wanted to let the public know that we're bringing forth some proposed language that's in the staff report packet, if you look at it online. And it's relating to the authority of this board to grant exceptions. And with reference to that matter, the exceptions that were recommended for approval by this board to the governing body for St. John's College will be heard on February 22nd. And we are also trying to schedule that same date for 462 Arroyo Tenorio that also had an exception that needs to be reviewed by the governing body, the city council.
Thank you. And nothing further?
And nothing further.
Thank you. We will move on to old business. We have one case under old business, and that's located at 805 Apodaca Hill. And I see that the applicant is here and he's coming forward. And may we hear that case, Angela?
Thank you, Chair Rios, members of the board. Greetings. This case is coming back to you for some changes that the applicant has made in response to board feedback at the previous meeting. For those of you who weren't here, I'll just do a quick summary of the historic background and also then recap the original proposal with the highlights of what's changed. So 805 Apodaca Hill is a 1,300 square foot. It's not two-story, it actually is a loft. It was built in the mid-60s and it is non-contributing to the downtown and the East Side Historic District. It's mostly Spanish or Pueblo Spanish revival style. If you can go to the next slide, please. That shows it has many faces, and that's the house and most of its sides. You can see it's many masses with flat roofs and parapets. In 2015, the board approved some changes to the windows and distance to the corners to come into compliance with the downtown and the East Side Historic District standards. So the applicant has proposed, if you don't mind, next slide, please. So we'll look at this first. This is approaching the house from Apodaca Hill, and the applicant is proposing 3 additions. As you look at this from this is the west side and it's the front, as that the lower arrow points to the larger addition guest house that's being attached to that south elevation. And the arrow at the top left is pointing to where the rear portal is being added in the back to give you perspective. Next slide, please. So I put these up first. These are the story poles for the guest house addition that attaches there. It's it's a few masses that are stepped up. And some of you saw that at the field trip today. Next slide, please. These are story poles for the other 2 additions. The one on the left is the front entry. There is going to be a new portal, and the story poles show the height of that. It's a shed roof with a stucco column. And then on the rear, it is a simplified portal extending from that lower mass. And the story poles show its height at the end. Next slide, please. So this is the floor plan, and the red boxes are where those 3 additions are. The main house in the middle, the casita or guest house to the south, and the entry portal there, the left, and the portal in the rear and in the back. Next slide. So these are the elevations for the west, which is the front approach. And the top is the existing, and the second is what was previously proposed. And the blue dotted circle shows that that wall that has been altered based on the board's previous review. And so the bottom elevation, along with those 2 renderings, are the current proposal for that wall. The applicant has, instead of it being 8 feet across, it has stepped it down, and that it It's at 8 feet at where it connects to the house, and it is 6 feet or 4 feet where it steps down. So that was the one change from the original proposal. Next slide, please. And this is probably the best way to look at this house, this nice aerial that the architect has provided. You can see the house from above, and the previously proposed addition has an arrow to it on the left rendering. See that wall. And then on the revision, you can see that the wall has been stepped down. And that's a good way to look at this house since it's complicated. Next slide, please. And there are no changes to, well, I'm sorry, of course, that's where the addition is proposed. So the existing is on top, and then the current proposal is for the addition right there. It slopes up. Next slide, please. And the east elevation is the rear of the house. You can see the back of the proposed addition on the left side and the new proposed portal there in profile. Next slide, please. And this shows that north elevation. From the north, it shows the rear portal there. And the applicant has revised the application to use wood posts instead of the steel posts as proposed before. That's based on board input. Next slide, please. And these are the finishes. The applicant is proposing one single stucco color, and that is to match the existing house, which is desert rose. And the addition, okay, next slide, please. And these are renderings of it. Wanted to put these in for obvious reasons. It's helps you picture how it might look. Again, the original proposal and current proposal is to there's 3 additions and replacing windows on the ground floor, and actually, yeah, to be divided light, or is it the second floor? I guess we can just confirm that. But at the last meeting, there was discussion about the 2 colors of stucco, which is now 1. And the windows on the original house are white clad, flagstone is the color. And the windows proposed for the addition are black. And that's in your packet, and you saw those finishes. The other part of this proposal is to add like an interior kind of courtyard wall at the entry that faces west. And I believe that's 6 feet high. And I'm not leaving anything out. I think that covers it.
Thank you, Angela. Board members, are there any questions, clarification, or any other type for Angela at this time? None right now. So applicant, please come forward and get sworn in.
If I may provide
Yes.
my recommendation, pardon me.
Oh, absolutely.
That I found it complies with the general design standards for all H districts, as well as the downtown and east side design standards. And one condition is that, and I didn't cover this in the proposal, is that there's an existing roof mounted HVAC, little mini splits that the applicant make sure that the line sets from the top of it are painted to match the stucco. And that's just part of what we do require. So other than that, staff recommends approval.
Is that publicly visible?
The mini splits
Right.
barely, and they're screening it with a short wall, but then there are the mechanical lines.
So it will not be.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Vahid Mojarrad, 147 Gonzalez Road, number 12. May I pass some handout for the
Yes,
board?
please do. And thank you for putting up the story poles. even though it was a bit treacherous getting up there with all the snow and ice. Thank you.
We'll see if you need to. Oh, okay. I have everything on the tablet. Does that work if I put everything on the tablet? Does it work? Better?
In the meantime, I'll tell you, thank you for the handouts. I'm looking at them and looking at the elevations.
Thank you.
Very, very nicely done.
Thank you.
Some additional.
That's why it's 9:04. Okay.
Um, Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the board. When I was here last time presenting the project, there was a motion with with two condition and one kind of like asking. The motion asked us to have the both houses at the same color stucco, which our revision shows that that has the same color stucco. The other was the wood, the steel member of the portal would be changed to wood, which we changed all the wood portal, all the members in the front to the wood, including that there was a stucco column in the in the previous one, which we changed into the wood column. I think some of the perspective would be easier to look at. So here you see on the top left corner, we're showing the portal with the wood column and all wood members. And the rear portal, which is not publicly visible at any point. And one of the pictures that Angela showed earlier, we took from Apodaca Street, but we still changed the post on that one was steel. We changed it to the wood. The horizontal members on that one still steel, but the appearance, we changed the wood column, and all the front portals are also changed to the wood column. The other request of the motion was to work with staff had some problem with the front wall that we worked it out. So on the right hand side, as you see, we cut the height of the almost 1/3 of it and make it lower. The rest of that wall still supports the the portal beyond it, and also provide a little bit of a shelter for that bench that's coming in there, which is the entry bench. So again, we reworked that element as well. These were the 3 requests on the motion that we addressed on all these revisions.
Thank you. I have a question in reference to the windows, the buttons.
Yes,
Will the buttons on the outside, will they have buttons on the outside? I believe that member Aguilar Medrano brought that up.
sure. Yes, the windows have mutton on the outside and the inside.
Oh, okay, because there is a window there that has buttons and it appears only on the inside.
There are some existing windows that was approved on the previous H board that we are not replacing, that has the button only on the inside, but all the ones that we are replacing and all the new addition windows will have button on the inside and the outside. And another revision that it just came to my mind as Angela was presenting, last time the H board request for the stucco color to be uniform. I think it makes sense for the windows to be uniform as well. So we are proposing all the window to be flagstone to match the existing house windows.
Board members, any other questions or comments at this time? Member Benvenu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm coming late to this party since I was not at the last meeting, but I did watch the video of the discussion. So I think I'm up to speed and read the minutes. And it's true that one of my concerns with the revised packet was it was a vast improvement and you addressed most of the issues, but it still had a lot of metal materials in the portals, but it seems like you've changed it since the packet. Is that correct? Especially the one that's the entry portal that's visible from the road. So it no longer has the steel I-beam
Correct,
and no longer has the metal rafters,
correct,
but it does have a corrugated metal roof.
correct.
Okay, well, I think that's a huge improvement. That would have been my primary concern. Are you still planning to use black for the windows on the addition?
No.
Okay,
We
All
are-
right.
we are
You're gonna
proposing
match.
to the flagstone, yes.
okay.
And on the last page of this presentation, I included a couple photo of the current project that has been approved through the H board and been passed that has steel members on it. And these are on the same H board district. They're also very, very visible. One is right on Gonzales Road, one right on the Alameda. Our project is at the end of a cul-de-sac and the back portal is really not publicly visible. But we listened to the H board and we made the changes.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's true that a few of these steel elements have infiltrated the east side, even in visible locations. But the problem is that every time that happens again, it creates further precedent. So I'm sure you can see why there'd be a concern on at least some of the members of the board on their part to avoid that outcome. But at any rate, you've addressed it. And it seems like you've also addressed the other concern I had about the entry portal was the stuccoed column, which seemed out of place. And now that's a wooden column.
That's correct.
Okay, so the only remaining concern I have is this archway entryway that you've modified. It's sculptural, it's not unattractive, but it does strike me that it looks out of place in that particular neighborhood and district. As you know, the standard for this district is that buildings either be made of adobe or appear to be made of adobe. And I'm not sure that that particular kind of sculptural wall that actually is also being used as a support could be made out of adobe. Do you think it could be?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I think Adobe has very sculptural
definitely.
ability to it, and we try to replicate it as much as we can. It's very hard with the wood construction these days to replicate all those Adobes, but nevertheless, I think some of the slope and the softness of the structure, and especially the mass of it, it's replicate the old Adobe wall construction.
Yeah, I agree that the sculptural quality of it certainly is consistent with it being made out of adobe. But what about the structural aspect of it? Would that work? Your design, if it was made out of adobe, would it support the arch and the roof as you've designed it?
I would definitely believe so.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Benvenu. Yes,
Madeline Aguilar Medrano has her hand raised.
yes. Member Aguilar Medrano, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First to the applicant, I do see that you incorporated many of our comments from the last hearing, so I appreciate your compromise on those items. My one outstanding concern still pertains to the portals, in particular, the one at the front entrance that Member Bienvenue was also speaking to. I believe my original motion, wanted to relook at the entirety of the materials, changing them from steel to wood. So my concern is still the corrugated roof that is on that portal. And that one in particular stands out to me, both because if I recall correctly from our first site visit, that one is visible from the street. And then also because it is getting attached to the original part of the house, which although it's not contributing, it is from the, I believe, 1960s. So we're just over 60 years old. So it seems like that portal in particular could use a more sensitive approach perhaps than the rest. I'm not as concerned as the one that has the latias in the back. But ideally, I think I would still like to see the corrugated roof removed from the entrance portal and from the entrance on the addition portal, and then perhaps keeping the one as is in the back. And then, as you know, I was on the fence about the windows last time, so I'm glad to hear that those are going to be consistent color of flagstone. So thank you for that compromise as well. And then I think I still shared Member Bienvenue's concerns, as with staff, about that new yard, well, it's not a yard wall, but that new sculptural wall, as we've been referring to it tonight, on the new addition. I don't know that lowering the outside portion of it helped from what we saw last time. But I think if you're confident that that could be constructive of adobe, that's something that I could see letting go through, perhaps if the portals were changed. That's all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Member Guida.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this applicant and their client have now come back to the board a second time with a revised design and in response to this board's direction. I think I was clear last time that I was a fan of this project as designed. I don't agree with other members of the board that, that there's a creeping in of metal or materials that shouldn't be in the district. These are allowed materials in the district. Staff has indicated that the project meets district standards. I would prefer not to nitpick this design, especially since it's so skillfully done. There was some discussion last time and in recent days about cases that have been brought before this board that have challenged some of the rules, or at least not pursued a design methodology that was strictly about compliance or being by the book. This was one of those projects. I feel like between the last hearing and tonight, where the applicant has addressed the board's comments, I think this has been done skillfully. I see a project that's really well considered. I see a project that's in compliance with the district standards. And I think further discussion on this is risking watering down a project that has a great deal of design merit and design intent. I'm satisfied with the design tonight, and I fully support it.
Thank you, Member Guida. Other members have comments? Member Beachside?
Just some comments. I agree with Member Guido with respect to the use of metal in projects. I think the two that are presented in your packet are two that this board approved. And they're both on new construction, non-contributing buildings, this is one of those. So I think that I would not have objected to the use of metal as proposed in the original design, but I appreciate you taking other members' comments into consideration. And with respect to the gate, the main entrance, I guess you might even consider that as a guan. We've approved others like that as well on new construction, very thick entrances that form sort of a room on the inside. And I like that element. I think that's really nicely done in either iteration. I had one question about the window color. Does that apply to the doors as well with the glazing? Yes. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just mentioned windows. It should be
Yeah.
doors and windows.
Thank you.
Any other comments? It appears not. I do want to thank you for listening to the board and applying what the board said to the project. I like this project, and one of the things that calls my attention to the roof line is that there's a variety of step backs and different steps to the roof line, and I personally like the thickness of that wall. I think it adds to the project. And as far as a corrugated metal roof, those are common in northern New Mexico. They have been used for a long time in northern New Mexico. I think the project has evolved into a very nice project, and I thank you for that, sir. And let's see, it appears, I'll ask for public comment, and then let's see what the board's going to do. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this particular project? Come forward. No one present here is commenting, and I'm wondering if anyone on Zoom. And there's no one on Zoom, so I will entertain a motion from a board member,
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion.
please.
Case 2022-006106 HDRB 805 Apodaca Hill. I move that the board approve the project as submitted tonight, noting that the applicant has agreed to change the window color on the addition from black to the color that matches the existing windows.
Beach, I will second with a friendly amendment, because I think the front portal design is different in the packet than presented tonight. I'll request that the applicant submit revised drawings to staff for approval before seeking a permit.
Accepted as friendly.
Any other amendments? Member Benvenue?
And no amendment, but could we just have brief discussion before voting?
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to make a clarification on the metal issue. I don't personally think that the corrugated metal is out of place on this particular building, and it is a traditional building material in this district. So when I was speaking of metal, I was referring to the steel I-beam that's going to support that corrugated metal roof, which is not traditional for that area. And I think it for good reason historically, but also I think that especially in the original configuration, when it was resting on a stuccoed support, which again, coming back to adobe being the material that's supposed to be under that stucco under our ordinance, it creates a disconnect when there's a heavy steel I-beam being supported by an adobe column. And that's the kind of subtle, but I think extremely important design element that creates the character of our district, and particularly a district like the Apodaca Hill neighborhood. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not corrugated metal necessarily I would object to, although in certain circumstances I would. But in this particular case, it was the metal rafters, steel rafters and metal I-beam, steel I-beam.
Thank you, Member.
Otherwise,
Benvenue.
I'm in agreement that I think this is a very, I really appreciate the applicants addressing all the issues that were raised.
Just to continue that discussion, just one point, I agree with you, and I have a similar feeling about the wood post supporting a metal rafters. That also seems like a little bit dishonest, as other members have put it.
Madam Chair, if I may, I think probably there's a larger discussion about dishonesty in Santa Fe style to be had. I'm happy that my fellow board members are engaged in that discussion and hope to continue it.
Member
That's-
Guida,
Yes.
a quick clarification to what a member Bienvenue was saying. So is this corrugated panel the only metal element remaining? And that's why Member Beach, I was asking for revised drawings. All the other posts and beams have been changed to wood. Am I understanding that correctly?
If the applicant could speak to that, please.
Sorry, I'll just clarify. My friendly amendment was with respect to the stucco post on the front portal is now changed to wood. And so I just was asking for clarified or revised drawings to be submitted that reflect that.
Okay, and then, then if the applicant can just confirm that is the beam now also wood?
Madam Chair, member of the board, all the front portals have been changed to the wood post and wood member. The rear portal, which is not publicly visible, this one, it's not publicly visible. We still change the request, change the post to the wood, but the horizontal members are still two.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion or comments? If not, roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Beachai,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you, and thank you, sir. We will move on to new business. And we have 4 cases under new business, which are at the same address, and that is 50 Mount Carmel Road.
Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt, but I will need to recuse myself, unfortunately, from all of the Mount Carmel cases.
Oh, okay. Let the record show that member Aguilar Medrano will not be participating in the Mount Carmel cases. She has recused herself, so thank you very much and good evening to you. Oh, well, you'll probably come back for the discussion items.
Yeah, it's my understanding that I have to log out of the Zoom at this point. But I can be on standby. If someone can either email or text me when it is safe for me to rejoin, I will do so.
Rios,
Yeah.
I know member Aguilar Medrano has left the room at times when she's disqualified herself from hearing anything that
Mhm.
has to do with the 50 Mount Carmel. But honestly, member Aguilar Medrano, I don't see any reason you can't listen to the discussion. Maybe you don't want to participate, and I understand that. But since this is appearing on YouTube and it's open to the public, there's nothing that says that you can't listen. Just to hear what's going on, even though you would not be able to say anything on the record.
Thank you, Attorney Rubali. Member Aguilar Medrano, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm happy to stay online as long as that's permitted.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for the clarification, Attorney
Thank
Rubali.
you. Thank you, Madam Chair and Attorney Rubley.
Okay, we will move on to these cases, and Heather, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm going to be presenting from the DS
That's
because my computer's here.
We can hear you quite well.
Okay, so this is the last step in a series of steps that we've had with reference to the Mount Carmel campus. Recall last July, we had a hearing where we designated buildings. And then we have also been considering the individual buildings as well. December, we considered Santa Nueva, and now these are the remodeling of the existing buildings. The first one we'll start with is with Santa Maria. Just one quick side point, though. On January 3rd, the Board of Adjustment did approve the special use permit for the campus and that particular use. And so the HDRB does know that has also been approved. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
Sorry. All right, so the Santa Maria building is located on the southern portion of the campus. You can see It noted with the arrow on the south side there, and it's adjacent to the carport, which was previously approved in December for demolition. The reason being is providing accessibility and fire access that was considered a non-contributing building. In addition, tonight we'll be considering San Miguel and San Juan as well as a yard wall. So the Santa Maria building has sort of a long history. At first, it was part of the Sunmount Sanatorium, his administration building, and some rooms. And then it was proposed to be the Santa Fe Inn. John Galmeen was a major force behind that. And it was not successful. And I'm sorry for the misspelling of the Bruins Army Hospital, but Bruins Army Hospital used that as an auxiliary due to the large demand or need for housing soldiers. So there for a while, there was an auxiliary Bruins facility here. After that, Archdiocese of the Immaculate Heart of Mary Seminary occupied the campus, and then finally the Order of the Carmelite Sisters. And so this is yet one of many evolutions, including the building, which has many evolutions. I've provided to you, which is sort of difficult to see, I'm sorry, the original drawing that of the Santa Maria building, and it shows you the divided light windows and the overall theme, as well as the picture. The overall theme here is that there's going to be a lot of restoration work in addition to some minor changes as well. If you recall, this building was designated as significant, so all facades are considered primary. The applicant was kind enough to provide some details on primary facades and all of that for all of the buildings. But if you'll note here on the drawing on the right, there's the yellow area that is a non-historic addition. And then if you also notice, there's a label that says non-historic enclosure. That's the portal that is going to be reintroduced as part of this proposal. And on the left-hand side, you can see the portal itself in that drawing that's being reintroduced with a series of French doors and side lights beyond as well. The existing windows on the entire building are not historic. So the scope of work, and I'm going to let the applicant sort of go into more detail. I don't want to, talk too much when they have a lot to present, but the non-historic windows are going to be replaced. There will be an ADA platform to provide accessibility. The non-historic storm door on the north elevation. So you can see the north elevation in the right photo here. This is part of the window assessment that was provided. That storm window is not historic. And then the door beyond is very similar in design to this main front door in terms of the accents and features, not necessarily the size. And so they want to bring that to the front of the facade at the front of that opening. Refurbishing the cross and the bell tower, and then other renovation treatments such as repair and maintenance types of items and stucco. So the new windows will match that historic style that was provided in the documentation. There will be some enlargement of the windows on the west elevation. And that is the reason is that they're behind, I don't know if you can see you can see this. They're behind the stairwell, and there are two non-historic windows here, and they're going to be enlarged on this elevation. There's been quite a bit of change that's happened over there. And then the sort of non-historic portal type of feature is going to be removed and replaced. In staff's opinion, that change will not impact the primary nature of that facade. And then the second story railing will have to be in compliance. Also, other railings will have to be in compliance with ADA and IBC standards and that 42-inch height. And the restoration of the iron railings also on the interior courtyard is being proposed. So staff recommends approval. It complies with the general design standards as well as the design standards for the reintroduction of historic features. And I just wanted to show to you sort of the living room area. There's a couple of interior photos. This was included on the HICP And so this is the building on the lower right is the photo from today, and you can see where that portal was enclosed and the walls were sort of punched through. And so they will be adding those French doors in that location and then removing that enclosed room where the checkered floor is. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions for Heather, board members? No questions. So Lisa, please get sworn in.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Gavioli, address 130 Grant Avenue.
Lisa, is that mic on?
I think so. I'm just not speaking very closely to it. Get this going. And I'll try and speak into the mic. So good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name's Lisa, and I'm here on behalf of the Modern Elder Academy. Really excited to be here with you this evening to present the renovation scopes of work for 3 of the existing buildings on the campus at 50 Mount Carmel. Just a little reminder, just wanted to introduce this fabulous team we've had the privilege of working on. We've been working primarily with Skylar Skikos, with Modern Elder Academy, but also with Chip Connolly. Jenkins Gavin is the owner's representative for the entitlements. Architecture by Architectural Alliance, Eric Enfield and Hunter Redman are joining us this evening. Landscape Architecture by Surroundings Studio. And I believe Kenneth Francis is online. If you have questions for him. And Civil Engineering by Orlan Goodad Ortiz with Design Ingenuity. And I'll skip through some of these things so that they're not repetitive. But we are located in the Historic Review District. And the total site is 12.4 acres. This just demonstrates the historic status designations that were made back in July. With the Santa Maria and the chapel being designated as significant, the carport and the casita being designated as non-contributing, and the remainder of the buildings being designated as contributing. And so this is our proposed site plan, and you will see the Santa Nueva building that you approved back in December. And the other primary changes to the site include walkways, a service drive along the east side and wrapping around the south side of the buildings. And just a couple of yard wall changes, which we'll discuss as we go through the different buildings tonight. This is a rendering, sort of a bird's eye view looking east. You'll see the Santa Nueva building here filling in this space. This is the entry wall and gate, which we'll be talking about in a later case, and the nice view to the chapel there with the mountains beyond. So the Santa Maria building, and I won't go through the history because Heather did a beautiful job with that. So we'll just really focus on the scope of work for the renovations for this building. And as I begin, I really want to just remind the board that this is very much a preservation focused effort, and where changes are proposed, the primary goal has been increasing functionality, providing adequate egress, improving accessibility to spaces and things of that nature. And as Eric mentioned to me earlier this evening, really the program and the preservation effort have really been in conversation with one another, such that preservation is at the forefront of all of our conversations for the last year, however long we've been at it now. Let's get through that. So going over the renovation scope, and I won't go, you guys have this in your packet, so we don't need to go into detail. But just generally, the non-historic windows are being proposed to be replaced with new white metal clad simulated divided light wood windows. Heather mentioned 2 windows on the west elevation for which the sill height is proposed to be altered to match one of the historic conditions. That those windows have changed multiple times over the years, but we do have a photo in which The sill height that's being proposed is being replicated. And then retaining and refurbishing a couple of non-historic windows on the east elevation, one on the west and 3 on the south. For doors, I think Heather really gave a nice synopsis of the door changes that we're proposing here. Again, removing the non-historic structure over the stairwell at the west facade, replacing it with a flat roof structure to match the existing overhangs, restoring most of the exterior doors, removing the non-historic storm doors from the main entry on the north side, and relocating the historic doors forward to the facade. And then removing a non-historic security door from the east elevation as well. The south portal we'll touch on a little bit later, but really this restoration effort, I think is going to be really a beautiful restoration for this building, bringing back to life this very prominent feature on the south facade, which was designed by John Gamim in 1938 as an addition to the building. And reconstructing the exterior stairs that lead up to that south portal, which basically the stairs come from the west elevation, and then adding a new handrail to match the handrail at the portal restoration. Again, Heather mentioned the ADA compliant platform lift, which will happen at the bottom of the stairs on the west portal, and then raising a portion of the portal floor to be level with the entry so that we can have an accessible entryway into the main lobby there. HVAC placed on the ground and screened from public view. And really the rest of it is primarily maintenance and repair, refurbishing and repainting handrails, the cross atop the bell tower, restuccoing, repairing canales, replacing missing wood trim, and so on and so forth. And then a final element is a yard wall that connects between, there's a courtyard that's being created at I'm gonna orient myself, southeast corner of the building and connecting over to the San Miguel building. And there's been a slight change in the orientation of that wall, just such that it's a little more squared off and creates a little more space for that service drive as we proceeded through design. That was shifted just slightly, which you'll see in the plan. So the masonry wall is 4 feet high and stuccoed to match the building. And then there will be a 4-foot high wrought iron fencing around the courtyard that I just mentioned. So just flipping through the plans. These are through each level. This is the existing ground level. This is the proposed ground level plan. And this is the wall that I was just mentioning. This is the stucco yard wall. And it's connecting to a stone masonry wall here, which is the existing stone wall. And this is the wrought iron fencing that was mentioned. So this will connect over. And I just want to also mention that where this wall appears to be touching San Miguel, it actually will be offset just a few inches from San Miguel, so it won't actually be attaching to the facade of that building. And I believe the same goes on the other end, so that the wall will essentially be freestanding. And I will flip through, I'm going to flip through to the elevations. This is the west elevation. I'll just point out a couple of things here. Primarily, I wanted to point out the sill heights that are changing on either side of the fireplace. This is the fireplace in the main Sunmount room, the sort of famous iconic room in this building. And there we do have a historic photo that I'll show towards the end. So these are the windows as they exist now, and then just lowering the sill height with approximately the same width. And here is an elevation showing the proposed yard wall. This is from the north side and wrought iron fence. And then the south elevation where the portal restoration is proposed, this being the proposed portal and the entry stairs that I mentioned coming up from the west. to connect over to the portal. And you can see a few of the little windows primarily at the basement level, I believe, which we're proposing to refurbish and retain where possible. And so this window on the top left, or this photo on the top left depicts the window light pattern that the proposed light pattern is inspired by. This photo is from the 1960s. And I apologize for the glare on these photos. There's photos of photos in frames, so it was a little challenging. This photo from the Sunmount Room in the 1940s approximately shows the sill height that we are hoping to achieve in that location to replicate that condition. And these are the 1920 drawings that we used as inspiration. I say we, I'm really talking about these fabulous people over here. I can't take any credit for that. The Rapp and Hendrickson drawings from 1920, the original architectural drawings from the building. So these were really the inspiration for the design of the portal. The windows and doors in the back of the portal space are different than how it originally looked. I believe that the impetus there was to create more natural light in the space. So introducing French doors with side lights in that space. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for that presentation. I, in particular, like the words quote unquote preservation focus, and that you and the team are focusing on restoring and then remodeling the things that need to be remodeled and upgrading the maintenance of the building. And so you're not doing huge changes, but you are doing restoration, lots of restoration changes, which I appreciate. Any other comments, Member Guida?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Lisa, for the presentation. And Heather, thank you for the introduction. So I would agree that, this is it's an important historic preservation project in Santa Fe. It matters a lot to the cultural figures that are associated with the arts in Santa Fe, with architecture in Santa Fe. We can kind of imagine this as the place where some of Santa Fe style was born. And so it has a tremendous significance. I know that this board status this building as significant.
That's right.
And does the building have any other status, either on National Register or State Register?
Madam Chair, Member Guida, we are in the process of applying for National Register status. We have gotten the first part of that application has been approved at the national level, and we're beginning our historic tax credit application process as well. And in the midst of the review there, I believe the next stage is actually finalizing, well, over the next couple of years, moving towards finalizing that National Register nomination and hopefully designation.
Great.
And that would be for the whole campus,
Right.
not just one particular building.
Got it. And given the importance of the site, I would imagine that, I am, and I would imagine that many on the board would be in favor of such a statusing. But right now, there's no state register for this building. Either SHPO is not involved, would not be involved with the review of the project as it is currently statused.
SHPO is involved in the review, and anytime we apply, anytime one applies for National Register status, that goes through the State Historic Preservation Office. That application has moved from the state to the national level at this point. At some point, it will move back. And I believe there will be some consideration for State Register status if assuming we make it through the National Register, the rigor of that process and getting the state and the federal level to agree on significance and all of those things.
So I guess where my question is, and maybe this is probably more specifically for Heather, is, where, given that statusing or that nomination process is in the works, and certainly I would understand SHPO has a role to play in that, and obviously folks at the national level. That's just the status of the existing building. In terms of review of design, which is what we're looking at tonight, the proposed rehabilitation of the facades and the exterior of the building. We're the only body that's looking at that.
Well, yes and no,
Okay.
Madam Chair, Member Guida, as part of the tax credit review process, the SHPO, along with the federal tax year and interior changes, and that has been part of our conversation from day one on this project. So we've been working with Post Oak Preservation Solutions out of Austin. They're our consultant on all things National Register and historic preservation tax credits. So that conversation is ongoing, and that review is underway right now at the state and federal level.
And Chair Rios, Member Guida, with reference to city boards and commissions, there is no exception that is being requested here. The final authority will be with the HDRB.
Got it. I guess my concern, is just in, obviously there are gaps between Secretary of Interior standards and what we require. And I'm wondering if because this is in process, if there's any opportunity, given the design changes that are being proposed, or hiccups down the road in terms of process.
Madam Chair, Member Guida, I believe that, that's a good question. I believe if there was an incompatibility with what we're proposing tonight and what the board hopefully approves tonight, and what the tax credit reviewers at the state and national levels are reviewing their opinions about that, I believe that could be resolved through administrative amendments potentially, or maybe we would need to come back to the board. I believe because everything that we have been discussing and that Hunter and Eric have been designing has really been very thoughtfully vetted through a very an excellent preservation consultant. I feel like we're on pretty solid ground in that regard.
Okay.
Post Oak has extensive experience with tax credit review. And so they've really been advising, yes, this will work. No, this won't work. And we've been, it's been that conversation for almost a year now. So I think we're in pretty solid ground, but I would imagine that there's a path forward if there are incompatibilities that arise.
I'm glad to hear that. And thank you for that explanation. I guess the reason, beyond the importance of the building and beyond the potential for this to be a National Register building, I guess, one, and if I may, I'm glad to see this particular drawing being presented tonight, the historic photos, the existing drawings of the unfortunate 1980s window replacement compared with what's proposed. And overwhelmingly, this is a tremendously positive change. And if, from the standpoint of preservation, I see some differences between the 1920s wrap and wrap drawings and the windows that are proposed, particularly in what were maybe sleeping porches or, and the style of those windows, and a gap to the 1960s and different windows in that configuration, and maybe windows that are being proposed in those to go back in those locations that are closer to the 1960s. We don't have a National Register nomination. We don't do a period of significance here. I'm wondering how you and the preservation specialists and design team have identified which period to go back to with these window decisions.
Thank you for that question, Member Guida. The period of significance has been defined by the evaluation of eligibility in the part one application of the National Register nomination. And I believe that period of significance spans pretty much the entire first half of the 20th century up to the 1962 campus expansion with the Immaculate Heart of Mary Seminary. So it does encompass the 1960s, the latest period of historic windows that would be included in that period of significance. So it's a good question, and I believe it probably will be broached at the tax credit review. But I don't know, Hunter or Eric, did you have anything that you wanted to say about how that window light pattern was selected?
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hunter Redmond, 612 Old Santa Fe Trail. Good evening.
Hi, Hunter.
So when we discussed the period of significance, one of the initial propositions was that the campus as a whole was being looked at as historic for the historic tax credits. And the master plan that was done in 1962 was sort of the focus of that campus-wide tax credit approval. So we looked at mainly the 1960s images for all of the buildings. San Juan, San Miguel, they were built in the 1960s, and then Fatima the 1950s. So since it was a campus-wide preservation, and we were looking at this period of time, we looked closely at the 1940s to 60s images of Santa Maria, and that's where these inspirations come.
And did the building, and thank you, that's very helpful. Did the building ever look like this drawing?
You know, we're not sure.
Okay.
We have looked through all of the images. We do know that parts of the building did,
Mhm.
but there's questions about all of it. There's questions, for example, the portal that you see there on the bottom, we don't know what that door actually looked like. We're not sure that window. We don't have any images from that period of time, only from the 40s and 60s.
Okay.
So there are portions of the building that we are certain either remain or originally looked like that. And there are other portions that we're not sure. And a lot of times it was images from the 40s and the 60s that remain. The earlier images are really scarce.
So, I mean, absent a complete set of photo documentation, a lot of the historic materials around those windows were destroyed probably in the 80s, possibly even before that. And again, I really appreciate you and the team kind of going there with me. And I think for the benefit of the board and the audience, this is not, again, we don't do in Santa Fe preservation with a capital P the way that we do, let's say, in the Park Service or with National Register buildings. But we are at a point where there is now a significant investment in this building and the other buildings on the campus. And I think, the applicant clearly has a desire to do right by this project, by this building, by the history. And I think we're all appreciative of that. And that's where these questions are coming from. And so that's the context. And, I fully understand that we have a period of significance, that we could choose a period to go back to. I also understand that, there are practicalities of the way the building exists today, the scope of work that we're choosing to pursue in the project, what's been lost over time and all that. So that's where this line of questioning is coming from. I'm not, hopefully not being overly nitpicky. But Hunter, just so that we know, I mean, there's a fair amount of speculation on a lot of the windows. Is that fair to say?
No, I think for most of the windows, we have images to show what was existing at one period in time, whether it was the 1960s or previous. I would have to sit down and go through every single window, but the majority of them, we have evidence that at one time they looked similar to what we're proposing.
Okay. And mostly from the 60s.
Mostly from the 60s, but
Okay.
so there were a lot of windows that didn't change from the 20s to the 60s.
Right.
There were a few that changed into the 60s, and they were changed mainly in divided light patterns, not so much in size. There's also some that we think were when it was originally built, it was built differently than the drawings. And some of those are kind of those long bands. And it's more the divided lights that are slightly different. But it was really hard to tell because we don't have those original images. We have some of them, but you can't get close enough to see. And we've looked.
Good. And I appreciate that. Yes. And I mean, I mean, I guess also for the benefit of the discussion, this is typically outside of Santa Fe process, a negotiation, right? Not so much a strict scientific archaeology process, but through a kind of understanding of historic material, the period of significance, the realities of the proposed renovation, a kind of clear direction is set and agreed upon. And I guess that's what I'm looking for tonight. So thank you, Hunter.
You're welcome. And just to let you know that we as a team, along with Post Oak, along with the owners, considered each change of window in each style and the period of significance very carefully in choosing what the final design is. So
Cool.
thank you for your questions.
Thanks.
Margarita, thank you very much for your questions. You brought up some subjects that I don't know that the other members of the board might have brought up, but thank you for bringing those up, both in reference to the National Register and in reference to what period they are restoring. Thank you for that. Any other questions at this time? No questions? Anyone from the audience wishing to comment in reference to this particular project? No one, anyone on Zoom?
Yes, Stephanie Benenato would like to speak.
Stephanie, you need to get sworn in.
One moment. I'm trying to promote her and for some reason I'm not. Ben, can you promote Stephanie Benenato, please? There she is. You can speak, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie Benenato.
Okay, do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Stephanie Benenato, P.O. Box 1601, Santa Fe. I first would like to note that I did not have access to the meeting at the time it started because the Zoom link kept saying that there was an internal error. And even when I tried to connect in through my own Zoom account, the web ID number said the webinar had already expired or had closed, whatever the exact wording was. And it was only after 35 minutes that I did get an email from Miss Lamboy giving me a link that actually worked. So I really, again, wonder about the open public participation. And I just would like to have a minute to just say two things. One, I think it's owned by Chabad, but it's a 3-story building there on West Manhattan at the 5-way intersection. And I noticed today that they put red awnings up on the 2nd floor facing west that are material.
Stephanie, may
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you. Can you please keep your comments in reference to this particular case that we're looking at?
Yes, I was hoping I could have a little discretion since I couldn't get on at the time of the public comment. But that's one.
Yeah,
and
I'm going to insist that you
I'll
just keep.
stop with that one. Okay, but then I would like to say on this case, I thought I heard Mr. Guida say that it was a contributing building. And I'm wondering how it actually could be contributing. I guess from the 60s, it is considered historic, but it sounds like there's been a lot of changes. And so I wonder if the board would ask the applicant in terms of what they do know, how many of the window openings are historic. And again, I'm a little concerned about the so much use of French doors and side lights. But I do think that there is a lot of effort being there to restore this. Oh, and one more thing. Instead of calling the other building Santa Nueva, which I find really sort of too new agey and kind of almost offensive to, practicing Catholics, that perhaps they could think of Santa Catarina, since I could tell you about 3 Catherines or Cateres that would be, related to that campus or to this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else wishing to comment? Anyone else on Zoom? No? Members of the board, are you ready to make a motion? I will entertain a motion. Member Benvenue?
Madam Chair, I have another question for the applicant.
Yes.
So along these lines, you know, again, knowing that we don't have exhaustive evidence of the windows, looking at some of the historic photos, so many of these windows are proposed to be casements. Is that the style of windows that were there in the 1960s, or at least the portion of the period that we're pursuing?
That is unclear.
Okay.
Guida. It appears from the original drawings that they probably were casement. So if you look at the style, I don't know if you can see what we have up right now. When you look particularly at the it appears from the light pattern that they were not double hung, which leads us to believe that they were casement.
Right. But I mean, those are not the windows that for the most part you're pursuing the design of, right?
Which windows are you referring to?
And
Ones that-
most of the sleeping porches,
Up here?
you know, show square windows in terms of their overall shape.
Lisa's saying that they were probably fixed and screened, but we do not know. Lisa's saying that these were probably fixed and screened, but we do not know.
Right.
But we're replacing all of them because all of them right now are have no divisions in them.
Mhm.
Replacing all of them. And just for consistency's sake, they are all casement. Operationally, up here on the sleeping porches,
Mhm.
we don't know what those were originally. And operationally, putting a window in there, it makes the most sense for it to be a casement window.
Okay.
Anything further, Member Guida?
No.
Member Benvenue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm satisfied that the state of the record does support the window treatment and the other proposed restoration of the structure. So for those reasons, in case number 2022-006110 HDRB 50 Mount Carmel Road, Santa Maria Building, I move that the application be approved as submitted.
Is there a second to this motion?
Berkeley seconds.
Berkeley seconds. Roll call vote, please.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Beachside,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the next case, which is at the same address. Heather?
Yes, just one moment. I'll start my PowerPoint presentation. All right, the next building that we will be looking at, Cherios and members of the board, is the San Miguel building. The San Miguel building is located just to the east of the Santa Maria building. And you can see it's attached by a breezeway to the chapel, which is at the center of the campus. The San Miguel campus was designated as a contributing building by the board back in July 2022. My goodness, I did not save okay, I'm sorry. The San Miguel building is going to have a lot of renovation treatments that are with reference to more preservation in nature than in nature of replacement or anything like that. There are a couple of doors that are going to be replaced. A window and door assessment has been provided to you. And one of the doors is an entry to the sunroom feature on the San Miguel building, which is on the north side of the west elevation. And then there's a door, you can see the SMG D102 there on the right picture. And that design will be in kind, but the door is in poor shape, and you can see detailed photos in that packet of the window and door assessment reports. The red that is illustrated on the floor plan there, it shows the primary facades as designated by this board, which would be most of the west elevation, as well as the south elevation where that porch is located. This is the porch that's on the site now, which will be retained in kind. So staff finds that this project complies with the general design standards. It complies with standards for replacement of historic material. Then that documentation has been provided and staff recommends approval. There are also associated renovation treatments, just like with the Santa Maria building, in that there'll be restucco, repainting, restoration of the historic windows and light. That concludes my presentation.
Board members, any questions for Heather? Member Guida.
Heather, just a clarification, the window replacements will be in kind, they're going to be wood for wood?
So the window, there's no particular window replacements, it's door replacements. And that's my understanding, but the applicant can confirm.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Here's not. Lisa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Thank you, Heather. Let me plug it.
Oops.
The black screen of death. Try that again. Good old fashioned muscle through. Apologies, just a moment, having some technical difficulty. To answer your question, Member Guida, I don't believe we are proposing any window replacements. No window replacements here, only window restoration on this building. And only 2 door replacements, both due to extensive deterioration, and they will be replaced in kind, wood for wood. The design will be slightly different on one of the doors, but it will be matching a historic door on another elevation.
Thank you for the clarification.
Smart glass. I don't know either. I don't think it's connection. I don't have that port. Yeah, this is what worked before. This right here. Okay. Just needed some magic. Thank you. Mystery IT man. So we're presenting now the renovation scope for the San Miguel building. The San Miguel building was built in 1962 as part of the 1961 master plan for the IHM seminary. This photo is sort of an overview of the west elevation. And again, the west and south elevations were designated as primary by this board in July. And just to resume going through the renovation scope, again, 2 door replacements. one on the north, it's the north elevation of the, I'm going to point to it. It's right here. The north elevation of the west, the north side of where that portal wraps around, that glassed in porch wraps around. And the other door, I believe, is over here at the basement level, right? So that's not going to show up there, but it's at the basement level on the other side of the building. It's just been hammered by sun over the years. So again, we'll be installing ground mounted screened HVAC. And the balance of the renovation scope is maintenance and repair, restoring existing windows per the window assessment, restuccoing, repairing canales and missing downspouts, replacing wood trim, hand railings, repairing those, and repairing the stairs between San Miguel and the chapel. And then I'll just flip through the plans, and maybe there will be an opportunity to point out. So find that door replacement. Is it right there? Right there. Right. Here it is. So here's the other door replacement. It's at this sort of northeast corner. And then this is the other one that we just discussed. And the elevations, these windows are double hung, 10/10, I believe, wood windows, and they'll be restored and repainted white. And there is the replacement. This shows the design of the replacement door to sort of match other doors at this level. The door that's there is sort of unspectacular, but also quite damaged and warped from the sun. And again, here's the other door replacement. It will really be identical to the other door on the other side. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Board members, any questions for Lisa at this time? It appears there are no questions for you, Lisa. Anyone from the public wishing to comment? No one in the room coming forward? Anyone on Zoom?
No hands are raised.
And no one on Zoom. I will entertain a motion, please.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion.
Yeah.
Case 2022-006111 HDRB 50 Mount Carmel San Miguel Building. I move that the board approve the project as submitted.
Chiva, second.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Beachside.
Yes.
Member Bienvenue,
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. And Lisa or Heather will move on to the next case. And that's the San Juan building at the same property.
All right, with reference to building number 3 for this evening, Cherios, members of the board. This is the San Juan building. It was part of the 1962 campus plan and it was constructed in the 1960s as well. You will note the large window on the proposed elevation has a grill that's being reintroduced. I'll talk about that in just one moment. Once again, back to the aerial of the property. So San Juan would be located next to the future Santa Nueva, and it's on the furthest east portion of the site to the right of that sort of roundabout little feature that's there where parking is provided. That's going to go away with sort of the creation of more of a campus effect, and no parking will be provided there in the future. So the request for the San Juan building restoration is once again in kind with the other buildings that we've discussed this evening, will be more restoration and preservation than it will be replacement. The drawing to the left is the original San Juan drawing, and you can see the grill that was once there that I imagine over time was removed due to problems with maintaining it. So the applicant is proposing to replace 2 windows with doors on the north elevation, which is not a primary facade. Once again, the applicant has been kind enough to provide a floor plan that illustrates the primary facades. So the north elevation is the one that faces Camino Cruz Blanca. And also they're replacing that window grill as well as associated renovation treatments. There is also a railing that is on the south elevation located sort of at the L, not the south elevation that is designated as primary, but this south elevation that needs to be raised in order to comply with IBC standards, building code standards. And on the north elevation, you can see the what was once a window has become a door here, and as well as here. Those are those two are on a facade that's not primary, and staff has no objection to those openings being replaced. Also on the west elevation, there is a door that there's a long portal here on the west elevation, and there's a door that exits from here. It's my understanding that the public will not be accessing that, but that door will be replaced right now. I believe it's just a metal door. And so the rest of the windows will be restored rather than replaced, with the exception of those 2 minor features. Additionally, the applicant proposed a 6-foot courtyard wall that would be facing Camino Cruz Blanca. That would be to the north of where where that door is going to be created. In discussion with the applicant, what was originally proposed as 6 feet has been since agreed to being reduced to 4 feet 7 inches to be consistent with the streetscape permitted height for that area for yard walls. And here are some photos, or I'm sorry, drawings as well, illustrating both the north elevations as well as the east elevation that I was discussing a moment ago, specifically with reference to the railing. And then you can see a detail of the yard wall, the courtyard wall on the right drawing. It's sort of, there's going to be a pedestrian gate inserted as well. And so staff recommendation is such that with reference to the general design standards, those standards are being met by this proposed project, as well as documentation being provided to comply with design standards section 14-5.2 D5. And staff therefore recommends approval of the proposed San Juan renovation treatments. There are other minor maintenance type of things that are being proposed, as with the last building. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions for Heather, board members? It appears not. Lisa, you have the floor.
If I can do it.
Thank you, Heather. Madam Chair, members of the board. Discussing now the renovation scope for the San Juan building. The image here is of the west facade, the front elevation of this building. And again, the historic status is contributing with the a portion of the south and the entire west elevation as primary. And the renovation scope, we are replacing 2 windows with doors on the north elevation, as Heather mentioned. The height and width of those openings will not be changing, but the sill will be dropping to the floor to create a door opening. And this is primarily for egress purposes and functionality of those spaces. Let's see. And then there are 2 non-historic exterior doors on the second floor that Heather also mentioned, that those will be replaced as well with the proposed door design to match historic doors elsewhere on the building. And again, at that west elevation, replacing the big monumental window grill that is no longer extant at the building, and matching the design shown in the original 1961 construction drawings. And also at the south elevation, it's actually at the south end of the lower floor portal. There's a window, there's a punched window opening at the end of that portal that there's some wooden spindles missing. from that grill that we're proposing to replace in kind. Again, ground mounted HVAC screened, and the courtyard wall, as Heather mentioned, we're reducing that height to 4 feet 7 inches. That will be stuccoed to match the rest of the building. And the remainder, again, is maintenance and repair, restucco, repairing wood elements and trim, repairing canales, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions? Heather, I do want to thank you for recommending that the wall go down and thank the applicants for agreeing to that. I think that was a good recommendation.
Well, I didn't go through the drawings, but you don't need to. If you'd like to see, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, if you'd like to see where those door replacements will be, I'm happy to go through the drawings in more detail.
Sure. If, I think I'm clear on it because I was on the field trip today.
Good.
And, I don't know if any other board members need to look at that. I don't think so. Anyone in the audience wishing to comment on this project or on Zoom? Is there anyone on Zoom?
Sorry for the delay. Yes, Stephanie Benato would like to speak. And
Okay.
you may unmute, Stephanie.
Sure, Stephanie Beninato. Yes, I too am happy that they're lowering the wall on Camino Cruz Blanca because my understanding is that they are coming in, the entry is off of Monte Sol on that little road, that like one block road that goes to the, where the Carmelites are. And then the exit is actually on Cruz Blanca. So I think it's really important that it doesn't get too high. And also, of course, that there would be the visual setback triangular thing that so people can really be seen and see when they go out. In terms of the windows into doors, my only question is, it looks, I don't have the drawings, I can't see them right now, but I thought the windows were actually big enough to qualify for egress. I'm sure you'll have that go through, but I just wondered how big those windows or how tall and wide, I guess both dimensions, those windows are. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Lisa, do you want to respond to that in reference to the dimensions of the windows?
I'm going to defer to Hunter.
So I just want to clarify that the windows that are being converted to doorways are not a residential egress from a bedroom. They're actually just additional egress from, one is from a hallway and one is from what's going to be a lounge. And it's actually a connection to the new courtyard that's being proposed on the north side of the building. So they're not required egress, but they are additional egress. And they're also connections to public spaces on the north side of the building that didn't previously exist. And in terms of the dimensions, we were just looking at them today. I think they are 36 inches wide and the total height is 66 inches, but it's double hung, so that would be 33 total. So that does mean that in all of the guest rooms, they need egress for fire escape reasons. So we don't have to enlarge any of the windows, which is nice. We can just repair them.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Member Benvenu?
No, but I'll make a motion whenever
Yes,
you're ready.
I will entertain a motion,
Okay,
please.
well, kudos to the applicant for another sensitive remodel and appropriate one. I think these are all just wonderful improvements to the property. You all deserve to be commended for that. Case number 2022-006111 HDRB, the San Miguel Building at 50 Mount Carmel. What? Oh, I'm on the wrong one. You are correct. I have San Juan underneath. Oh, where did I do San Juan? Let me see your San Juan. Okay, so it's actually 2022-006112 HDRB, San Juan Building at 50 Mount Carmel Road. Move to approve as submitted with the additional condition that the yard wall be lowered to, I believe it was
4 feet, 7 inches.
inches, if I'm not mistaken. And the revised drawings be submitted to staff for approval.
Guido will second.
Roll call vote, please. Melissa?
Thank you.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Beachside,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue, Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. And then the last case in reference to this particular project has to do with the 5-foot masonry wall. And we will listen to Heather.
Thank you, Chair Rios. The purpose for the masonry wall that is being proposed is to help to create a sense of place. The applicant is hoping to make the campus really a pedestrian campus like you would find at a university, for instance, and not have the vehicle sort of be so prominent on the campus. A drive will be created for fire access on the far eastern portion here along Cruz Blanca and will wrap around the buildings. So there will be no real reason except for emergencies and repair to utilities that are located under the road here that anybody would have to actually get into the campus via a vehicle. So also the applicant has shared with me that ADA access would be provided through the use of golf carts and the like, if that is needed as well. So the masonry wall location is between the Fatima building and the Carmelite building that is currently there. So the approximate location is where the red arrow is pointing. So the request is for a masonry wall with metal entry gates. The height of the wall itself will be 5 feet. And the pilasters themselves will be approximately 6 and 7.5 feet. That will be adjacent to the proposed metal gate. A pedestrian gate is also proposed next to Fatima. The wall does not touch the buildings. It just goes up close to the buildings. So the staff requested of the applicant that additional information be provided regarding the material and the color for the gates. And the applicant is prepared to speak to that tonight. These photographs illustrate the view on the right looking out towards Monte Sol and the view on the left looking toward the chapel, and the general location of the wall is where the photographers, or where I was standing. So the gate will be required only for emergency and utility access. The opening will be only required. If there's other deliveries or what have you, that may be the only other potential use. And this is an illustration from the special use permit that was reviewed by the Board of Adjustment and shows you the landscape plan. And so the applicant has an innovative stormwater treatment system with a series of what is being referred to as acequias and other landscaping treatments. And the primary campus will be pedestrian oriented with individual courtyards and the like for the existing buildings that, as we just discussed with the San Juan as one example. And the elevation of the gate is illustrated on the left-hand side and the left image, and you can see the pilasters and the stepping in height to the gate, which I estimate to be approximately 6 feet high. And as to the operation of the gate, I don't know that detail either. So we may want to ask, the board may want to ask the applicant whether that's going to be an automatic gate or something that's manual. And the overall intent of the design was to not block the view of the chapel, which is a major terminating feature of the campus. And also provided here is a detail illustrating the Carmelite building, just to provide a little point of reference as to the adjacent building's height, as well as on the right-hand side would be the Fatima building. So this would be looking out towards Monte Sol, this graphic here. And so therefore staff finds as a recommendation that the general design standards for the historic review historic district have been met. with the exception of pending additional detail on the proposed metal gates for the pedestrian as well as the vehicular gate. And we will defer to the HDRB to find whether that is suitable for the historic review districts. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Heather. And Heather, you are satisfied that the chapel view will not be impeded by this, by the wall
Chair Rios, yes.
and gate?
And that is also part of their, that was a condition of the National Register review of the project. I'll let Lisa go into more detail, but that was a condition that was associated with that application.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Heather? None, it appears. So Lisa.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. So final item to discuss the entry gates and yard wall. So this is a view similar to what Heather presented, although maybe a little earlier in the year, of the view corridor towards the chapel. And although there's nothing in our code that regulates view sheds and view corridors, particularly in the review district, and especially with this being a private drive, it is important to both the applicant and to the tax credit review process that the view of the chapel not be impeded by this entry element. So this is looking at the wall and gate and plan view. And I'm orienting myself. So the top of the page is looking towards the west. So this curvilinear line here will actually be the new curb for the reconfigured parking area. So there will be no regular vehicular use of this area. It is, as Heather mentioned, and can function as a fire lane, basically as an emergency access in case of an emergency. But will primarily not be used for vehicles. The pedestrian gate is sort of tucked behind the two pilasters on this north side. And again, the walls will not touch the buildings. What you see here are bike racks. And these elevations, I believe, are really illustrative in that, particularly elevation looking to the east, the view of the chapel, there is a bit of topography such that the chapel sort of sits higher on the landscape than the driveway does. And so as you're looking that direction, the chapel will still be visible over this entry element. Just a little note about the design of the entry gate here. This design was inspired by a John Gaumim door design from La Fonda, I believe, from the 20s or 30s, some period. I've got that photo a little bit later on. But so there is a bit of design inspiration, very thoughtfully introduced here. And then the pedestrian gate replicating that same pattern. And here is the historic photo of the design inspiration for that gate design. And in terms of materiality, it hasn't been fully determined what the material is yet. And I can let Hunter speak to this in more detail. But my understanding to this point, the discussions to this point have been that we do want the gate to be metal for maintenance purposes, but really have it be a more distressed metal, and perhaps introducing some wood elements as well. But really looking to keep it in a sort of rustic character so that it's not going to be a very contemporary looking metal gate. That's really the primary goal. If you have further questions, I can allow.
So on this metal gate, where would you introduce the wood elements?
That's a topic of discussion. It's really, at this point, we are sticking with our story that it's going to be metal because the compatibility of wood and metal and the sort of expansion and contraction, as I understand it, is difficult for maintenance. But it's still under discussion. So at this time, we're proposing a metal gate. And if it's determined that wood should be introduced, we would of course come back with that change.
Thank you. Lisa, any question? Yes, all three of these people have
Sorry, who was
questions.
first?
Member Benvenu, I don't know.
Go ahead. Thank you. I just have a few questions. So if I understand correctly from the drawings, the wall, I guess what the gate's connected to is going to be 7 feet, 6 inches high. Is that right? Pilasters?
The pilaster is immediately adjacent to.
Okay.
to the
And then the gate itself is 7 feet tall? That's what I see indicated in the plan.
I believe that's correct. It's 6 to 7 feet.
Okay. And is there a reason for, I mean, that's a very tall gate. There must be some rationale behind.
The rationale is to block headlights because this was the main drive is coming down this corridor. So it is to block headlights from shining into the main.
Okay.
campus.
What, so Heather,
Some privacy.
what's the allowed height for a gate and a wall in this streetscape? You calculated that?
Chair Rios, member Bienvenu, with reference to walls that are not located on a public street, there's been more leeway that's been given to those particular walls. So we had discussed, Lisa and I, the 4'7" height, but then we talked through the fact that this isn't a public road. It's just really sort of a driveway functioning as a driveway for the Carmelites. So it's treated more like an interior wall that is not affecting a streetscape. So the applicant's proposal is 5 feet, and of course with the stepping, and those are decorative features, and the gate really is up to this board and whether it's found as suitable being 7 feet high. But it's my understanding those lights, and especially when you're thinking about lights coming up the drive, you know, they could easily illuminate the chapel area as well, because that area is higher. So just to have that perspective so that it really does effectively block the headlights of vehicles.
Okay, so your position is there is no streetscape here for a height determination.
Chair Rios, member Bienvenu, that's correct.
Okay, but then our fence and wall guidelines also have a not a requirement so much as a suggestion that anything over 4 feet high needs special approval by the board, right?
Chair Rios, a member Bienvenu. That is correct. However, this is in the historic review district, and typically features like these are reviewed by staff. But in this particular case, as it's part of the historic campus, the staff felt that it would be good to bring it to the board for review.
Okay, and then the fence and wall guidelines also desire gates to be fenestrated, right?
That is correct.
Is this fenestrated or is this solid?
This is intended to be solid to provide privacy because it really is a closed campus for the majority of its use will be closed and privacy is a consideration, particularly with the Carmelites right here as well. This gate is approximately 500 feet back from any kind of public right of way. So it's, you know, although it is going to be, it will be visible as you enter the campus, enter the private property from the public right of way on Mount Carmel Road. It is a ways back from any kind of notion of a streetscape. It's not really, I would not consider it to be a component of a streetscape.
Okay.
Which is really what the wall and fence guidelines are speaking to. That's my impression anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess I think all that may be true. It's still of concern that this wall is so obstructive to the view of the entry. And I can't believe that, I don't know where someone would be standing to see the view that's indicated on the upper elevation drawing, but obviously if this gate is 7 feet high, it would be obstructing the view of someone that was anywhere near the gate unless they're 8 feet tall. So I'm just not sure. It seems very clear to me that this is going to obstruct the view of the chapel on the entryway. And it also bisects the campus in a way that seems very contrary to the feel of the campus. I understand that you have that you have interests in doing that for your purposes and how you want to use the campus, but it doesn't seem like anyone in a master plan ever would have designed it that way originally, unless you see that in the original master plan. So it does seem concerning to me, as something that I think is detrimental to the view and the feel of the campus. I guess one question I would have, if you want the privacy, is there, I don't know where your property boundaries are. Is this on the property boundary?
No, Madam Chair, Member Bienvenue, the property boundary, as I said, is about 500 feet to the east, to
500
the
feet
west, rather.
of what you own.
I'll so yes,
Yeah, that'd be
you're
great
the
to
property
see on
boundary.
there.
I'm going to flip back to the site plan. So the gate element is here.
Mhm.
The property boundary is here.
Okay,
This is all a private drive and private parking lot. So the entry to the campus by vehicles, and I don't imagine there will be much pedestrian traffic here. But by vehicles, we'll take this route and go into the parking lot. Guests will be dropped off in this area and primarily enter probably through the pedestrian gate and enter into a pedestrian zone. And I would, just to respond to the notion that this gate and wall bisect the campus, I believe that it is an appropriate enclosure of the pedestrian zone of this campus and separation of the vehicular zone from the pedestrian zone. And really creates a more intimate space, which is how this campus will be used.
right. No, I get that you're changing the campus essentially by creating a pedestrian zone and trying to separate it from the rest of what was the master plan for the campus. And do you have a plan of what the pedestrian zone, how it's being developed?
Well, you're looking at
As far
it.
as landscaping goes? and
I don't have the
where
landscape plan
acequias
with
are
me
and
at-
so forth.
I don't have the landscape plan with me at this time, but what you do see are pavers that honor the original curb or the existing curb, the historic vehicular pathway. And this has all been designed in conversation with the National Park Service tax credit reviewers to honor at least the appearance of where the previous pavement was, although it's not historic pavement and we don't really know where the original curb was. And then we're, retaining this circular element in front of the chapel, retaining this circular element in front of the San Juan building. And then the circulation pattern becomes a pedestrian circulation pattern rather than a vehicular one.
Is there any possibility of giving thought to the idea of being able to create that pedestrian zone and prevent traffic with something other than a wall and gate? So bollards or planters or some kind of obstruction that allows this still to feel like an open corridor, but it would protect the zone from influx of vehicles?
Madam Chair, Member Bienvenue, I believe that is highly not desirable because this really is meant to be a closed campus. It's meant for retreat guests and sabbatical guests to be able to come and stay and retreat from the world, study and participate in Modern Elders programs, which are very much private, very much introspective. But there is some interaction with the community. But in terms of the program and how this campus will be used and as an adaptive reuse of a historic campus, we feel that it's appropriate to introduce more privacy into the space.
Could you get that by putting this wall and gate at the property boundary instead?
No, I don't believe we could, because again, this is the main vehicular circulation. And in order to separate vehicular circulation from pedestrian circulation in a way that is respectful of the programming, I don't believe that would be a compatible approach.
Thanks.
Thank you, Member Benvenue. Member Bichard.
Yeah, my comments were similar with respect to the height of the gate. I just find that difficult to reconcile with the statements about preserving the view of the chapel. I know that's not exactly in our purview, but if it is important for the National Registry, I'd be interested to know what those conversations have been about the height of that gate. And I noticed the pedestrian gates are also quite tall, 5 feet 6 inches. Is there any thought of lowering the gate to match the 5-foot wall, over which I imagine headlights could also be transmitted?
We have not had that conversation because we're presenting the desired design.
Okay, sure. And have you had the conversation with the national body?
Those conversations are really just beginning. And
Okay.
I have not been part of the conversations with the National Register or the National Tax Credit Reviewers. I don't believe this element has been discussed in great detail yet, although I'm going to defer to.
We have not had the conversation with any national organizations. We have had Post Oak Preservation advise us on what we have designed so far, and they are comfortable with that, but we don't have any approvals and we have not had any official conversations about that. I do want to note that one of the requirements of this gate is that it be 20 feet wide for fire access and for utility access. And proportionally, a gate that is that wide, if it were 5 feet or 4 feet tall and it's that wide, first of all, structurally, that's awkward because it's 10 feet long. And then secondly, proportionally, that's awkward. So having sort of the ideal proportions of a gate, if something is 20 feet wide, you don't want it to be too short. It won't be elegant. It'll look awkward. It'll look out of proportion. The finished floor of the chapel is 15 feet above the level of the bottom of the gate. So, of course, I'm short. If I walk right up to the gate, I won't be able to see the chapel. If I'm back a few feet, perspective wise, you're going to see the door of the chapel and the chapel. And we've looked at this in 3 dimensions to ensure, yes, at some point you're standing right in front of it, you're not going to see it. But in terms of obstructing a view as you're driving into this area, you're going to be able to see the facade of the chapel, the mosaic, the doors, and most of the facade.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful information. I had one question about another gate that I think is in the parking lot. It's item 6 on the, I think it's the site overview. It looks like it's marked with an emergency sign, and I just wondered what that's connected to. Is there a new wall being built in the parking lot?
Madam Chair, Member Beachside, there is not a new wall being built in the parking lot. You're talking about the parking lot that
At the corner of Fatima.
Right.
Right.
So there is there will be a new gate. There's a slight redesign happening in the parking lot to keep the Santa Fe Prep parking area distinct from the Modern Elder parking area. And that area is, those 2 spaces are already gated off. We're just moving that gate to a different location.
Oh,
But it's not a gate, so per se,
Okay.
it's more of a chain
Oh, I see. Okay.
bar. It's a bar.
Oh,
It's just a
gotcha.
metal bar.
Thank you.
It's very utilitarian.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Bichard. Member Guida.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, a question for Heather, just as a practical matter, I understand this is in the transition district, without a material sample for the gate, without a stucco sample for the wall in the packet of, are we able to approve this?
Chair Rios, Member Guida, the wall is approvable because it is wall dominated, meets all those criteria in the historic review district. The reason I requested the applicant provide information at the hearing for the gate was to be able to let the board determine whether that was appropriate or not. At this point, we don't have clear direction. That's in my opinion.
Thank you. So it's a question mark. Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may, I just, I know that this case is before the board. This is not a case, if this were on a different property, this is not a case that would go to the board. It would be reviewed and handled administratively by staff primarily.
Chair Rios, Member Guida, even as staff, if this was a staff review, I would be asking for additional information.
Yes, my point is, and I don't mean to contradict you in the slightest, Heather. My point is that a suggestion would be that if the board wants to approve it with whatever modifications they feel is appropriate, and with a condition that more information be brought to staff for material, that could happen. It is a perfectly allowable thing to do.
Anything further?
No, thank you both for that explanation. I think that is my only concern, is the completeness of the application. As far as the height of the wall and the design discussion, I was happy to hear Hunter's comments about at least the proportion of the gate, and the understanding of this in the landscape. The board members have made good points about, the elevation not being a true view, and it's kind of abstract, but I very well take the point that, standing further back from the wall, the chapel will be fully visible because it is on a hill and there is a significant rise in the property. The reason why I kind of raised the issue of design is that we often on this board get kind of caught up in letter of the law and the exact height limits of while those are strict limits, or in the case of fences, design guidelines, I think that the other considerations of design, not only at the scale of the gate and the proportions of the gate itself, but also at the scale of the campus, must be addressed. And I kind of hammer this point quite a lot, that scale and height are not the same thing. Scale is very different, and it depends on a number of design considerations being considered together. Height and width in terms of proportion, but also scale and mass and the overall scale of the campus. In that context, this gate and this entry wall make a tremendous amount of sense for me. I think that what we're looking at in the application is the lowest that this wall could be and still make sense with the scale of the buildings and the scale of the campus. I think that I am, I know this property fairly well. I'm not particularly convinced that the automotive centric campus planning that occurred over time is necessarily something that's hugely important to the status of this place as a campus. It's probably more to do with the relationship between the buildings. I really like the abbreviation of that overly long driveway that was there just for fire and for the cheapest way to make all that happen. I appreciate that the applicant has taken other measures to address emergency access and tuck it away to allow, how and improve how this place functioned as a campus, as a pedestrian campus. It was always problematic that, that it was asphalt and not something more pedestrian friendly. And I think that's what the proposal does. It brings that space into a kind of a scale with the buildings. It returns those surfaces to pedestrian friendly surfaces. And from what I can tell from this, albeit abstract site plan, that's more of a kind of civil engineering site plan than a design and landscape plan, we're going to see more of that in the final design. So I'm happy with that. Bottom line is I think that this gate proposal and this wall proposal are totally in scale with the campus and in line with the intention of what's significant about this place as a grouping of buildings. And so I'm supportive of that. I just don't know that without a material, how to make a motion that adequately addresses that concurrence with the design.
Thank you, Member Guida. Lisa, can you tell us how the gate will operate? And again, tell us when it's going to be open, when it's going to be closed.
Sure, Madam Chair, I will mostly defer to Hunter on this, but I believe the gate is intended to mostly be closed. And I don't believe operability has been discussed as yet.
Okay.
It is my understanding, Madam Chair, that the gate is not going to be automatic. However, that might change. It would be only operable when there, in case of fire or for maintenance reasons. So it'll be closed the majority of the time, which is why we have the larger pedestrian gate to the side, because that will be the ingress and egress gate that will be used most of the time. So this will remain closed. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the pilasters that are to the right and left of the gate, the ones that are closest to the gate, those will be 7.5 feet high. And what is the width of those?
They are 30 inches, 2'6",
Again?
2'6", so 30 inches.
And that's the same width as the next lower pilasters, which are probably at 6 feet.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
Well, my feelings are that I feel that this gate is just a bit too high. I don't know, that campus has, or that area has been open for such a long time. And I understand that you want to have, I could understand that you want to have something that is an entrance to a school and that you want it closed, but I would really think that you could achieve the same thing with not as high a gate. 7 feet, that's, I don't know. I'm almost 6 feet and I just feel like 7 feet is awfully tall. You're making a big statement. Maybe that's what you want to make.
Well, I think that this significant campus and the scale of the campus deserves to have a statement to it. And as I said, we are required to have the 20-foot opening. I think at one point I did draw it as 5 feet tall, and proportionally with a 20-foot opening, the gate looked a little too long and thin. Design wise, it looked awkward because it was so long and thin, especially a heavy gate. It's that wide. And so the choice to raise it a little bit really helped in terms of the feeling of the design of the gate. Yes, it makes it feel a little bit heavier, but proportionally and design wise, it really works better at these proportions. Could it be made shorter? It could. But I think the feeling of the long linear rectangle doesn't feel historic. It feels awkward. It's not the historic proportions that we see in gates and doors that were designed by Meme, this was inspired by. So I think it's more about the proportions that really work with this wide opening that we're required to have for fire access.
Madam Chair.
And
Yes.
I'm sorry, I
Attorney
didn't mean
Rubenstein.
to interrupt you, Ms. Redmond. Were you finished?
that's okay. I wanted to comment about the material, but go ahead.
Well, I'm a bit concerned here as the Assistant City Attorney for the City of Santa Fe that we're not discussing exceptions to a height restriction. Now, I'm not saying this gate can't be built, and I'm not saying that the applicants haven't made some good arguments that might fit into exception criteria. But I'm wondering, it seems to me the discussion is that there are no height restrictions in the code, which I don't necessarily agree with. I'm looking in the code and I can give you a specific citation, 14-5.2 subsection D9, and it's buried in some subsections in here. There are height restrictions when a proposed building, yard, wall, or fence is located on a lot with no frontage on a right of way. we need to decide if that applies or whether or not this is a proposed building, yard, wall, or fence located on a streetscape that includes no buildings, yard, walls, or fences. And how we define the streetscape is an issue. But what I heard is that because this has no frontage on a right of way, there's no restriction. It's not exactly how I heard it, but
That's not what
there
we
is,
said.
well, and so maybe we need to hear that more definitely. But there are restrictions on yard walls on for a building or a yard wall on a street with no frontage on a right of way. If this is in the historic review district, we may need to have a discussion as to how the H board applies, the authority of the H board applies in a historic review district, because there is a section that sort of limits the H board's authority in the historic review district to properties accessed from Canyon Road, Camino Militar, Apodaca Hill, Camino Rivera, Camino Cabra, Camino Santander, Camino San Acacio, Camino Del Monte Sol, Camino Rancheros, Camino Ranchitos, and other streets. And as I understand, this property is accessible from Camino Del Monte Sol. So I think the H board does have authority if in fact it is accessible from Camino Del Monte Sol. And I believe we do need to calculate a yard wall height if this is located on a lot with no frontage on a right of way. In which case, as I said, that doesn't mean they can't build the wall. It just means that the board has to consider exception criteria. The board may be delighted to hear that this is part of the exception criteria that the H board does have final approval, because it is a D9 exception as opposed to D1 through 8 exceptions, which have to be recommendations to the governing body.
If I may, D9 specifies calculation of maximum heights for buildings.
Well, that's,
It may refer to walls and fences, but it does not provide specific guidance for calculating wall and fence height. Or the wall and fence guidelines are what determine wall and fence height. That is my recollection.
well, I can show you what I'm referring to, and Ms. Gavioli.
Might have appreciated that before we get to a
Oh,
public.
sure. I'm looking at 14-5.2, subsection D, subsection 9, which controls height, pitch, scale, massing, and floor step backs.
I'm familiar with the code. Thank
Okay,
you.
subsection A, little Roman numeral 2, subsection capital D. And I'm reading from the code: when the proposed building, yard, wall, or fence is located on a lot with no frontage on rights of way, the streetscape is defined by measuring a distance of 300 feet in all directions from the midpoint of the facade, which contains a principal entrance of the building. I would assume in this case here, yard, wall, or fence. The height of a proposed yard, wall, or fence shall not exceed the height of the tallest yard, wall, or fence within the streetscape. So that's,
If I may, 300 feet in all directions is still on the property.
well, and that, I understand that, it doesn't indicate that
This code is
it has
governed
to
by,
exceed the
by
property. It just
by a
indicates
concept
it's
of
300
streets.
feet from all directions. So, and I don't know if that's actually been calculated, but
I would like
again,
to
I don't want you to
request
think that
additional
I'm saying
time.
that you
It's-
can't get approval for this. I'm just saying that the exception criteria may apply, and you may have to make an argument that the circumstances that you described meet the exception criteria. That's,
Thank you for that explanation. I believe that this is a really unfair way to hold a public hearing on a case that was submitted months ago. If there were concerns about the legality of our application, to bring them up at the public hearing is not the right place or time. And therefore, I would like additional time to speak with you about your concerns.
I would indicate that
think that
the
would-
reason that Attorney Rubali brought this up is because of the discussion that has taken place this evening. And that is his interpretation of the law as he sees it.
It's
And
just reading the code and going off the cuff, but we can have that discussion later.
Heather,
Chair Rios, with reference to the interpretation that was made by staff is true. There is no streetscape. Lisa and I had a long conversation about that. And so if you were to use the circle, as you would see in the code, with 300 feet around the particular site. The only two, looking at the aerial, and of course, the calculation that we did for the San Juan building, which faced Cruz Blanca, then that calculation is taking into consideration Santa Fe Prep and other buildings in that particular streetscape in both directions. And yard walls. And so, but here there is a 6-foot yard wall that's around the Carmelite Seminary at the rear. That would be within the 300 feet. There are properties that abut this property on the west side that are residences that face Camino Monte Sol. Those are 6 feet, if not higher. I don't quote me on the specific numbers, but I'm doing approximate. And the only other wall that's actually on site is the Santa Maria, and that is approximately 6 feet as well. So the overall height, which I could confirm, would be 6 feet and would not require an exception in this particular case. Also, if this were to be considered an exception, and we would have to hear this again because an advertisement would have to be made as an exception, but it's staff's opinion that that would not be required.
Thank you for those comments. Member Berkeley.
Madam Chair, I just had a question, given all the comments that were made tonight, and Member Guida's question in particular, concerns about the height. And then I just wondered, out of respect for the applicant who had to wait already several weeks because we couldn't even, because of quorum issues, we couldn't even hear your case 2 weeks ago. I just wondered, in terms of timing, if this one part, this one wall and gate were to be postponed, does that really hold your project up tremendously? I mean, everything else has been, I think, passed. It's just such a beautiful job you're doing, and everyone really respects it a lot, I think. And I was just wondering if this were to be, one discussion were to be put off for another few weeks, would that hold up? Would that be too big of a problem?
Madam Chair, Member Berkeley, I don't believe it would cause a significant delay in the project. It just feels very much not ideal to this process that we've been in discussion with staff for weeks, and we had a very specific conversation. And thank you, Heather, for summarizing that. In terms of public process and fairness of process, it feels a little bit like a gotcha moment from the city attorney.
Well, I think that what it boils down to is that the board evaluates the project, in this case, gate and wall, pilasters, and then the board is going to make a decision in reference to this. So that's what it boils down to. And I'm hearing different comments in reference to this, but we'll see where this takes us. Member Guida.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, I don't agree. I don't think that this is a kind of valid approach to the case. I agree with the applicant that this is a changing or moving of the goalposts on a case that has already been vetted by staff and has received staff recommendations and has come to this board and in front of the public. We've spent a considerable amount of time on this case already tonight. The city attorney's office, their role is not to obstruct these cases when they come before the board in a public hearing. They're to support staff and this board in the interpretation of code. So I would agree wholeheartedly with the applicant that this is, out of process and not the right way to go about this case to move the goalposts midway through. I still have questions about whether we can approve this and under what conditions we can approve this based on the materials. But to me, that is the only issue. It's clear to me that this does not satisfy the conditions of a streetscape wall or yard wall. This is internal to the property, and just going through those rules, it seems like staff has already reviewed that with the applicant. And I don't think that should be called into question at this point.
And that's why I'm saying that what it really boils down to is the evaluation of this board to make a decision, depending on whatever route they're going to take. If they listen to the city attorney, if they listen to the applicant, if they listen to Heather, but that The decision rests on our shoulders.
Madam Chair, the city attorney's role is not to provide a rebuttal to cases that are brought before this board.
But what I'm saying, the bottom line is the board makes the decision.
Correct.
The buck stops right with you guys.
Chair Rios, if I may, I'm sorry about that. This wasn't part of the discussion before this was brought to the board, and I apologize. I have no problem whatsoever with the presentations we get from Ms. Gavioli and the staff there at Jenkins Gavin, but I just can't allow the board to proceed in disregard for the code. If you find some reason why you think we should proceed, I would like the board to make a record of that, but I'm just saying that I think that there needs to be a discussion about the exception criteria, and I'm not saying the applicants can't fulfill all that exception criteria. And it probably does need to be advertised, and I apologize for the delay, but again, I can't read the code and see that we're proceeding in disregard for the code and sit here and say nothing about it.
Well, there's evidently a disconnect between your interpretation and another staff member, Heather's interpretation.
That's right.
Correct?
Heather is not an attorney.
Yeah.
I'm the city attorney. I'm here to tell you, you need to proceed in accordance with the code, and we need to make a record as to why, if we're disregarding the code or if the code doesn't apply, we need to make a record of that. I would like to know what that is.
And I respect your opinion. And we'll see where this takes us. I am going to ask for public comment. Anyone wishing to, pardon? Oh, yes, Member Biche.
Just, so I think the code pretty clearly says that the determination of whether or not an exception is required is determined by the staff, and then it comes to us. I think section 9 that Frank is referencing pretty clearly says the height limitations of any structure are defined in this section. And that includes all of the comments you were making about the yard wall heights. They're used to determine a height limitation on a structure in the streetscape. So I disagree with that. I also disagree with the fact that that we're in this position. This has happened more than one time. We didn't have a question about how to proceed. We didn't ask for clarification. I think we were all pretty comfortable with the height being allowed in this private drive. I think the question, from my perspective, the height was only raised as a way to understand the view of the chapel and the relation to the campus. And I appreciate the applicant's explanation of that. The perspective is difficult for me to determine on the plan. So it's helpful to understand, like, yeah, that's on a hill. So I think I'm in agreement with Member Guida. The materials, I would like to know more about that. I would like to know if the design is in plain or if it has sort of raised elements like the doors at La Fondo that were the inspiration. Those details would be helpful. And I think if you could give us some sort of parameters, I'm comfortable with staff approving those kind of design details. But as far as an exception being required, I really strongly disagree with that. We have not advertised that. We have not put walls internal to a property in that category before, and we have wall guidelines because the code is not sufficiently addressing those. So even bringing an exception criteria for wall height in any capacity is really shaky ground with the code we have. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone? Member Benigni.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May as well weigh in. I don't really see this as just a disagreement among staff. I mean, my view is that when the city attorney advises the board, we have an obligation to abide by the city attorney's advice. I mean, the city attorney is literally here to advise the board. They're not just, Mr. Ribbolete isn't just giving his own personal opinion. And I don't believe we have the authority to disregard the city attorney's advice. Now, I don't know what that advice is just yet, But if the city attorney is advising us that we have no legal authority to approve this application as it has been submitted to us, I just don't think we vote on whether or not we agree to abide by that or not. And it doesn't matter even if there's a disagreement with the land use staff. And it doesn't even matter whether it's right or wrong. We don't have no one's delegated us the authority to disregard that advice. So in my view, if that's Mr. Rebelede's opinion that he is providing to us as the designated representative of the city attorney's office, then that's what we need to do. But I would defer to him as to whether or not that's actually that black and white of a position that he's taking.
Well, Member Bienvenue, just my suggestion is that this specific proposal, not the others which have been approved by the board, and I didn't see any problem with any of those, is that this be set over and that the board consider exception criteria that's found in subsection C5, C5C regarding height, pitch, scale, masking, and floor step backs. Again, I think that a lot of the same reasons that the applicants have presented to the board may fit into this exception criteria, but I think that that exception criteria needs to be set forth on the record. And again, I'm sorry for any delay, but I certainly, if it appears that the board is proceeding without authority, I have to bring it to the board's attention. I can't just sit here and remain silent on that.
Thank you, Attorney Rebelede. Heather, did you have something?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rios. With reference to simply stating it, there's no streetscape. The consideration is the 300-foot diameter. It as called out in the code, there are 6-foot and higher walls in that diameter. And so the average height, and I can confirm this with a field visit, and Gary Mokino can help me with this, the historic district's inspector, that the allowable height would be 6 feet, and what is being proposed is 5 feet.
And that is, if Mr. Mokino goes out there and does some measurements, it may very well be that the height of the tallest yard wall or fence within the streetscape is somewhere in the vicinity of what the applicants are proposing, in which case then you wouldn't need exceptions because then it meets the code. But it is common for Mr. Mokino to go out and measure yard walls on streetscapes and make a finding to the HP division director that that's the average yard wall, or that's the height of the highest yard wall. You see that all the time with compound structures and compounds, but then we have that evidence and then we make a definitive determination whether this wall meets the code or whether there needs to be an exception.
Madam Chair,
Thank you. Yes.
could I just, I don't know if I still have the floor or not, but I appreciate all of that. But so it seems to me that perhaps the way that we solve this, because maybe we were already trending towards a postponement for further information on the materials anyway, that we can defer it, postpone it for that, and also a determination of the streetscape, which may mean that it could be reheard depending on that determination at the next meeting at the same time as the materials. It would only be if the streetscape determination differed from what Ms. Lamboy was suggesting, which seems unlikely, that there would need to be an exception or a renoticing of this process. So it seems to me there is a fairly simple solution that would satisfy all those concerns, as long as we don't get involved in an exception debacle. Does that make sense? Is that as a solution?
You say no, but that makes sense to me. That seems to rectify. That seems to be going in the right direction to rectify. What we have to do is to evaluate this case and come to a conclusion. And I do feel by the comments that were made earlier that we were moving towards a postponement, whether members of this board agreed with the gate or not. That's what it seemed like they were moving towards.
And on further clarification, would the gate also be subject to determination as to its height in the streetscape?
Chair Rios, member Bienvenu, and there's architectural gates and architectural features around a gate are not considered as part of the overall height. It's the wall itself is considered part of the overall height.
Which seems anomalous because then you could have a 15-foot high gate, and that would not be something we could review.
Yeah, and including the
at the discretion of
pilasters,
the-
correct? The pilasters are not part of the height process,
That's correct, Chair Rios.
as I recall.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes,
just
Lisa.
express a preference to be postponed so that we can have more discussion with staff about this issue.
Yes, but I have to ask for public comment. Anyone in the public wishing to speak on this project, whether it's on Zoom or here in this room?
On Zoom, Chair Rios, there is. The first person who will be able to speak is Adam Johnson. Adam, you may unmute and please state your name and address for the record.
Adam Johnson, PO Box 1055, Santa Fe, New Mexico 87504.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, very interesting discussion. Madam Chair, members of the board, I first want to start by saying that I really appreciate the work of the applicant, the agent, the architect, the landscapers, the landscape architecture firm, the engineering firm for sensitive proposed restoration and for some handsome additions to the campus and the feeling that it will bring this campus into fruition. I do feel like it's a shame that the gate, which is quite handsome otherwise, is so high. It seems like it would block some of the feeling of sort of entering the campus and entering it. And so, it's regrettable that it's the last thing on the docket today. I just felt like I should make that comment, but I do want to commend the applicant for really a sensitive job on the buildings on the campus. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Anyone else?
Yes, Chair Rios, the next person to speak is Stephanie Benenato.
Stephanie?
Unmute.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you, Stephanie.
Stephanie, I think we've lost.
Oh, I
you.
think you remuted yourself.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry about that. I don't know how that even happened. I think that that it's good to postpone it because I do really think that you need to see the materials. I think having a solid gate there is very just not really in keeping with I don't know, with the need for some kind of openness there. And I really think a 6-foot high gate would be sufficient. And it would be in keeping with the other, what at least Miss Lamboy was talking about, as far as I can understand, that there were 6-foot high walls in other sections of the property and probably at least some along that streetscape. However, I do find the reasoning to be somewhat contradictory because how many lights are really going to be coming into that area? Because they've insisted over and over again that no one's really going to be driving there, that really maybe it'll be staff, but they never provide the numbers of staff that are coming and going. And lights usually are at night. So how many people are really going to be coming and going at night that you'll actually need a solid gate there? And the other thing is, and Councillor Rene Villarreal brought this up in another context, I believe, But it's really culturally insensitive to call whatever drainage, water drainage systems that are going to be on this property acequias. They are not acequias. Acequias are a very specific legal term. And really, I don't think it shows cultural sensitivity at all. It's sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like fake wannabe kind of part of that community when you're not. And again, I would just try to find a different name for those water features. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Chair Rios, there's one more that can speak. John Eddy, you may unmute. Please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. My name is John Eddy. My address is number 14 Avenida Campo Verde, Santa Fe 87506.
Thank you. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. I feel that the height of this gate is inappropriate and it basically presents a very inhospitable face to this approach to the property. I do appreciate the applicant's need for privacy there, but I think that the height of the gate as is proposed is very imposing. It's imposing to a pedestrian and as such is not in fitting with a human scale as I see it. Those are my feelings. I would like to see you postpone this, or perhaps there could be a quick discussion as to whether lowering the height of the gate, pilasters, and wall to be no higher than 6 feet. If this could be amenable to everyone in the room, perhaps there's a way to get through this and clear the application. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Eddy. Anyone else?
Yeah,
No one else? If there are no further comments, I will entertain a motion, please.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion.
Yes, Member Guida.
2022-006113 HDRB 50 Mount Carmel Yard Wall and Entry Gate. I move that the board postpone review of this case in line with the applicant's preference and for the applicant to return with a complete design package that includes material recommendations for this. If there is to be further discussion with planning staff, that could happen during the postponement period.
Is there a second to this motion?
Berkeley seconds.
Is there anything further to add to the motion? Member Bienvenue.
Well, I don't know if this is acceptable or not, but I would add two things to the motion. One would be that during the postponement, staff will review whether or not what the applicable streetscape standards are and whether an exception is required and report back. And secondly, that the applicant be asked to consider lowering the gate and pilasters to no higher than 6 feet.
With
On a
all,
condition.
with all due respect, I don't agree with either of those.
So I will call for roll call vote.
Member Berkeley,
Yes.
Member Beachside. Excuse me.
Yes.
Okay. Member Bienvenue
No.
and Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Do we have to postpone this to a date certain? Or will you work with the applicant?
Chair Rios, I'll work with the applicant. If the applicant has an idea as to what particular dates the applicant would like to come back, we can state it now, or if you prefer to wait.
I mean, our preference would be to come back at the very next hearing. And I don't know if that's in 2 weeks or in a month.
The next hearing is February 14th.
It's February 14th. I mean, that is our preference.
Thank you. We'll postpone it to February 14th.
Okay. Thank you all. And the first three cases went pretty smoothly, but I think that all of you know, including Lisa, that sometimes things happen and cases don't go as smoothly as you planned. And has been shown in the past, sometimes when cases are postponed, you have a chance to look at things a little bit more closely and maybe come up with something that is more acceptable to you and more acceptable to the board.
Absolutely. Madam Chair, we really appreciate your input and thoughtful discussion.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. And I feel like I do have to say something in reference to our city attorney. Whether you agree or disagree with him, I think that Mr. Rubalid, as the assistant city attorney, deserves the respect of the public and this board. And he is here to do a particular job for the city. And I think that in the very least, he deserves our respect. And we need to listen to him.
Madam Chair, thank you. And I apologize if anything that I said came off as disrespectful. That was certainly not my intent. It was more
And
about-
no, this wasn't
about
just
timing.
directed to you, Lisa. It's directed to everybody. So
Thank you.
anyway, have a good evening. And we still have more stuff to do here. And we'll go to discussion items.
Thank you, Chair Rios. Just quickly, summation of what is before us. It was determined by the city attorney's office that in the case of exceptions relative to design, not to height, and preservation exceptions need to be granted by the governing body and not the HDRB. As to history of this, I looked back at the original ordinance, since the original ordinance that was adopted in 1957. And there was no provision with that ordinance as well. I think may have been intentional in that we want to encourage applicants to think creatively and not have to ask for exceptions. And so that, is the reason that was put in place in that manner. Having said that, though, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are lots of unique circumstances in historic districts, and those unique circumstances deserve consideration. It is the opinion of staff that maybe the best approach would be to have the HDRB be the authority through a text amendment, but also beef up the standards just a little bit to provide for, making sure that the exception is warranted with the criteria. So I am going to share my screen. Let's make sure I have the right thing here. That is my memorandum. Just one moment. I also have up the exceptions text. Okay, here it is. Not showing. Just one moment to do a new share with the right window. There, it's correct. Now, I am going to increase the size of this so you don't. I intentionally left the comments from staff in the packet just so that you can see what our thinking was. We would like to get your perspective on this. And if not tonight, I mean, this is intended to be more of a study session type of opportunity than a formal review at this point, because I know that you need to sit with it and think about it. As to process, eventually the board will make a recommendation for this text amendment to the governing body. We'll have to go to, since it's a change to chapter 14, it will also have to go to the planning commission for review and a recommendation to the governing body. And then ultimately the city council will have the final review authority and approval if they choose to do so. So I don't know if you want me to go over the specific changes point by point, or whether you would just like to make comments, just sort of referring to the extra sort of criteria for an exception. You can see item number 3, the language that I put in was conclusively demonstrate that all design options have been considered, including providing the following technical reports. And that for an example, the window assessment that Ray regularly provides, a report on I have to move things around, a report on the design process and programs to illustrate why other options were not explored, and if needed, an updated historic cultural properties inventory form at the applicant's expense.
So Heather, the changes that are being proposed, are those that we are reviewing, are those simply language changes as opposed to authority changes
Chair Rios?
of the H board?
Sure, Chair Rios, it is the opinion that the H board has authority, but not in the particular case of granting exceptions. So the city attorney determined that this is required to grant authority to the H board to allow those exceptions to design and preservation.
But this is just in reference to design and historic preservation.
Yes, that is correct. Height,
Not to height.
right. Height is currently does provide authority to the HDRB.
And did you indicate that in 1957, the ordinance did or did not include exceptions?
Chair Rios, it did not include.
Okay, that's what I thought, that was appropriate, that was correct. Yes, Member Guida.
So Heather, just a few questions about this, and I thank you for sharing the edit with us in Word, and it's good to see some of the thought process behind this and the questions back and forth. So we're going from satisfying three exception criteria to 5. Is that the current proposal?
Chair Rios, Member Guida, that is correct.
Okay, so an applicant would then have to respond to two additional criteria for an exception.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And generally speaking, is there a reason why we're making this more stringent?
Chair Rios, Member Guida, the reason being that the overall intent of the ordinance was not to make exceptions an easy thing to get. And just like a variance, there are specific criteria that need to be addressed. And so as to ensure that there was not another option, that is the rationale for including that language.
Do other parts of the code have 5 criteria to be met, or are there fewer?
Chair Rios, Member Guida, there are 5 criteria for instance, criteria for a general plan amendment or for a rezoning. There's at least 5 criteria. And I would have to look at the code to understand specifically what the numbers are, but there are more than the 3 that
Okay. I mean, just on this point, I'm concerned that we're making, I think we all know, and at least I recognize that there's some very difficult criteria in the existing 3 to satisfy, most notably number 2, prevent a hardship. This board has struggled with whether or not to include economic hardship. There's been debate both within the board and with the public about what constitutes a reasonable accommodation of use, of disability, of many things. And in my view, we do have a code that is very prescriptive and does provide a great deal of guidance on formal outcomes within the historic districts, and is very specific to those districts. I challenge the thinking that requires applicants to do much more and potentially opens up with 2 additional exception criteria, that same difficulty and gray area, that's kind of multiplying the difficulty of this task to get an exception. We have a review board that is capable of understanding the circumstances of a project based on a staff report, based on consideration of code, based on design drawings, based on design presentations, based on money spent by applicants, based on all of and the performance that they do before us here. I don't know that I agree that, that we have to make exceptions hard to get. I think if we continue to appoint sensible people to this board and we continue to elevate public discussion as we are doing, locking it down with legalese is challenging to me on that point. And I feel rather strongly, obviously, about that. My second question is to do with the difference between areas where the board is to approve or has the authority to approve certain features, and where this new language says may recommend exceptions for design standards and signage to governing body. What's the intent there? Are we saying that in this text amendment, the board has authority to rule on signage and on exceptions to design standards, but if they decide to abdicate to the governing body, we may do that? Is that the intent here?
Chair Rios, Member Guida, the intent is to give the authority to the board formally for signage and determining, instead of having to go to the Board of Adjustment, having the board determine height. And as an overlay district, the Historic Districts Ordinance is an overlay. It can have that type of authority as well. And there are specific criteria in the sign code that deal with historic districts. So it's appropriate that the H board manage all of those items instead of having an additional trip to the Board of Adjustment.
I certainly am in favor of that. Thank you.
Member Benvenue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on that last point, there are 6 exceptions in the very next provision, subsection C, for height, pitch, scale, massing, and floor setbacks. But I am in general agreement nonetheless with the idea that I'm very reluctant to get involved in tinkering with these exceptions right here and now. To me, there's so many things about this ordinance that once we start playing with it, there are a lot of things we would like to change. And to change it piecemeal, I think, would be a huge mistake. And especially since I understand that we have a consultant right now that's looking at revising all of Chapter 14. So to me, this is just a little piece of a much bigger project. And I just see it in such a more simple fashion. To me, this entire dispute comes down to the fact that there's language in subsection B that says the board may recommend exceptions. That's the only thing we're trying to solve for. All we have to do is change that language to say the board is the city administrative board that reviews and grants exceptions, and we're done. I just see that as the only thing we need to
agree
change.
with that. I mean, aren't we the body that is capable, that is determined to be the ones that are going to grant these exceptions? We go through a huge evaluation, a huge review process. And I feel that this board is the authority that has the ability to grant exceptions in reference to design and historic preservation.
And that I know is your intent. That's the whole reason why you're revising this, is because we all thought we had that authority. You reviewed the code and realized we don't. You're just trying to correct that discrepancy, is what I understand the situation we're in to be. So I don't think there's no dispute at all about whether we're the right people to be doing that. It's just correcting an oddity in the language of the ordinance that no one apparently ever noticed before. So I would just like to see that corrected in the simplest way with the fewest possible words, because I really feel like we're opening a can of worms once we start adding on new exception criteria at this point. I'm not necessarily not in favor of the ones you've proposed. I just would like to discuss that in the context of a whole review of the ordinance.
It's a good idea.
Bravo, John. Yeah.
So, and I think that that's all that needs to be done, is to import the language that is the exact language under subsection C, the first sentence, and just put that into subsection B and replace it, and then we're done. I mean, of course, you can review and make sure that's true, but that's my just review of this indicates that I think that's the solution.
And I think that's,
We already have the language in subsection C that we want.
I think that's a good idea.
And yes, I agree with members Bienvenue, Guida, and Chair Rios that my understanding is all we are trying to solve is the issue of the HDRB not having the final say on exceptions under subsection B, and that doesn't seem to me mean that we should be adding additional exception criteria or making the exceptions harder. That's not the fix we're looking for.
So is that, would that be sufficient direction for what you're looking for from us tonight? Do we need to do anything more, like vote on anything, or just is that sufficient?
This is just a discussion because I wanted to get your impression. I guess the overall intent of sort of beefing that up is to be consistent with, the original intent, but their points are well taken in terms of the hardship, and all of the existing criteria really do address that. And I also like your idea, Member Bienvenue, that we actually sort of get more into these conversations with the code update rather than in this particular case. So I think that's a really good approach. And if it pleases the board, I will bring this back for a formal item on the agenda next time to review the transfer of language or copying of language, and to decide if you want to make a recommendation on that formally.
Member Beecher.
Just a question about that process. So, this issue was raised by the legal staff. Are they not able to directly ask the city governing body to make this change to the code? Like, why do we have to make a recommendation? So, is there another path? Because it really is not we're just being told that this isn't working. It's not really a recommendation from this board.
Just for a text amendment, generally, there's a specific code or a process that's outlined in code regarding text amendments to Chapter 14. So taking it up to that higher level that applies to everything in Chapter 14, then that actually has to go through in this particular case, the H board, the planning commission, and then the governing body. It's spelled out in the code.
Okay.
If I could point to a specific provision of the code, we don't refer frequently to section 14-2.6. Most of what we do is under 14-5.2. But under powers and duties of the HDRB, it indicates that the chair may determine and shall have the review and decision-making responsibilities set forth in a particular table, which is another section. But there are several places where the HDRB makes recommendations to the governing body on policy and procedure. And it's not real specific about changes to the code, but it does indicate make recommendations to the governing body relating to the erection of appropriate plaques and markers, recommendations to the governing body relating to the purchase or acquisition of real or personal property of historic background, make recommendations to the governing body as to the exercise of the governing body's power of eminent domain. So in various provisions, the H board recommends policy and procedure to the governing body. As I read this, it's solely a recommendation, but I think your recommendation is important to the governing body. I think the governing body wants to hear your recommendation.
Just my point is that it's not really our recommendation, but I understand that that's the way to get to what we need. I'm fine with that. What I have a real issue with is the way we're implementing this ahead of the code adjustment, counter to precedent. I don't understand the timeline for this. I've never seen the code changed on my time on the board. I don't know how long this is going to take. Like, when does it even go to the governing body? And in the meantime, we have applicants coming forward with exception requests that are being just indefinitely delayed until we resolve this internal city issue.
Well, I think a member Beechai, Madam Chair, is that we don't know how long it's going to take to completely revise the code, because there are a number of revisions that I would recommend to other parts of the code that would be part of this broad code.
No, I'm just referring to the one text change.
Right.
Like, how long does that
This
take?
one text amendment, as soon as, when it comes to the governing body, the answer is as soon as we can get it on the agenda, but sometimes you can't get it on the agenda for the next governing body meeting because the agenda's full. But this is a
Exactly.
specific fix that I think we all agree. We don't want project applicants' projects held up because the governing body because the H board can only make recommendations on exceptions to the governing body. So we want to fix that so these projects can go forward. So you have the final say.
Yeah, I understand that. We've been operating by approving exceptions just across the board. And until this code interpretation was formalized with the appeal that happened. So I just don't know why we're not just operating on that same precedent until the code changes. Instead of, it seems like we're going out of order in my view, like we've arbitrarily, we don't know the governing body will approve this. We've just decided we're not going to issue exception approvals anymore, and we're going to postpone everything. It just seems that I just don't understand that.
Sure.
I mean, it makes perfect sense that the interpretation has changed, that it's instigated the research based on the appeal. That all makes sense, and I think it's good to review the code and to have a suggestion for improvement, but to implement something before it's actually a rule. I mean, I know your interpretation is different, but we've been operating under the same code in a different way for a very, very long time. And the expectation has been that the applicants will get an approval. Now I mean, I don't know how long, it's already been going on for several months.
Since November, yeah, member,
Yeah.
Madam Chair. This was something that we discussed extensively, myself and City Attorney Aaron McSherry. And we asked, how did this get started that the H board had the final say on these exceptions when not our interpretation? This is what the code reads. I'm looking at 14-5.2 subsection C5B. The board may recommend exceptions to subsections 14-5.2 D 1 through 8, 10 and 11, 14-5.2 E through I for construction or alterations in the historic district. The recommendation for exception shall be made to the governing body.
Yeah, no,
That's what the code reads.
I see.
So we wondered, how did it get started that we strayed from this? Was there something like a code interpretation, which the land use director can do under another section of the code, which I'd have to find, but the land use director can adopt an interpretation of the code for some ambiguity. And at one point back in 2019, there was actually a subcommittee of the board, which met with Assistant City Attorney Sally Pies. And at the time, the land use director was a gentleman named Ari Isaacson. There was a Mr. Eli Isaacson. And there was apparently a draft proposal under the authority of the land use director to adopt an interpretation that read that the board makes a vote on the final exception, and not that it goes to the governing body, but that is decided by the HDRB. The problem is that when we found that particular document, and I can probably find it and circulate it to everybody, apparently Mr. Isaacson never signed off on it. It was never published. It's required to be published somehow. It was never published. It doesn't appear on, we can't find any indication that it ever appeared on the city's website. So it just never went into effect. And in discussing that with City Attorney Ms. McSherry, she said she doesn't think that the land use director can adopt an interpretation of the code under the provision, which if you want to know what it is, I can find it for you, that changes something that's clear in the code. So apparently since 2019, I believe the H board was under the impression that that would be published, that would be signed by the land use director, and it would go into effect. Subsequently, Mr. Isaacson left that office, and for whatever reason, it was never published. So we didn't follow the procedure. And my opinion, as well as Ms. McSherry's, is that you can't change a code provision like this with an interpretation by the land use director. It has to be a change in the code adopted by the governing body. But you know, I know it was a big question, and we spent a lot of time reviewing, you know, was this actually ever adopted by the governing body? Was it ever published? And we couldn't find, in fact, I even asked, I think, Carly, when I was having this discussion with Carly Picarello, who was also of the opinion that the H board should have the final opinion, have the final say on these. She said she thought it was published someplace. And I said, we need to see a print from the website or something that shows that this was ever published, and she couldn't find it. So all I can tell you is that interpretation apparently never went into effect, but we don't think that that would be sufficient to change this provision of the code, which clearly specifies that the recommendation has to go to the governing body.
And it is very likely that the governing body will agree with the H board. The issue is that we're trying to cure something sooner rather than later. Because in the interim, you know, for instance, St. John's College is going to be going February 22nd, Arroyo Tenorio is going to, so staff will try to get it on to a governing body agenda as soon as possible. We've had a whole slew of other cases at governing body recently that's how it fell as to when they could be accommodated.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
that's
just a really cumbersome process that we don't have a lot of
Correct.
control over, that extending months and months on people's projects. And I think that's pretty unfair to them.
yeah. So that's why we want to fix it as soon as possible instead of waiting for a code update.
So Member Benvenu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think we should speed up the process
Yeah.
to the extent we can. So I will make a motion that the board make a recommendation to the governing body to be put on the earliest possible agenda that staff can get it on, that that the language of the ordinance be revised such that 14-5.2 C 5B, the first 5 sentences of that sentence of that paragraph be replaced with the first 4 sentences found in subsection C. And if you need to, you know, if there's a few words that need to be changed to make that work, then I would defer to staff to be able to make the language work, but that's the intent.
Wait a second.
Yeah, I think I heard you say subsection C twice.
So I meant
Didn't you have
B,
to say B?
B is the one that's
Yeah,
being
You have to
revised
say B.
using the language of C.
Right, okay. Clear. Yes,
Chair Rios, if I might just read those sentences, just to be sure that I understand. So this is the language. The board is the city administrative board reviewing and granting or denying requests for exceptions from regulations set forth in section 14-5.2. When requesting exceptions, the applicant will
And
change
could you-
that.
Could you
specific
stop for one
code
second?
citation.
So that where it says 14-5.2 D9, you will then use the language that's in current B, which is D 1 through 8 and 10 through 11 and E through I. You see how that works?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we'll update that. When requesting exceptions, the applicant shall use the procedures for public notice and hearing set forth in section 14-3.6B3, unless the applicant also requests a variance to the underlying zoning. In such case, the applicant, and we might have to address signage there, but we could even just parse that out separately because that's so rare
Right.
that we can maybe just not consider that right now if that's the pleasure of the board.
Yes.
And let me see here. In such case, the applicant for H ordinance exception shall not be required to publish legal ad in the local newspaper. So we'll strike that sentence. And exceptions are project specific and do not apply to the subject property in perpetuity.
Right,
And
which is
then-
already in B. So I think at this point, you're back to B.
Go back to B. Okay, sounds good.
okay, so
Thank
we're
you.
clear on that.
Yes.
And we have a motion and we have a second, and may we have a roll call vote?
Yes, member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
member Berkeley,
Yes.
member Beachside,
Yes.
member Bienvenue,
Yes.
member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. And
Chair
thank
Rios.
you, Member Benvenu.
This was not a public hearing. It was more set in a study session point of view, but there is a request to speak from a member of the public.
Okay, even though we already made the motion, was I supposed to get a public input?
Not in this particular case. Okay, we'll defer to the city attorney. This discussion item.
I don't think you're required to get public input on a discussion item. I don't think there's anything that prevents it. You're just making a recommendation.
Who is wanting to speak on this?
Chair Rios, Stephanie Beninato.
Okay, Stephanie?
May I allow her to talk? You may unmute.
Thank you. I really appreciate being able to say something since you made a motion on the discussion item. And I think that exceptions were supposed to be rare and they've become all too commonplace. And I think that's really my concern. And I think that's why there was a recommendation that the board made recommendations to council. I talked to somebody, I mentioned this to somebody who grew up here, has property in the historic zone. And she told me that it was David Koss who decided that the board should make the decision because it was too much trouble to take it to city council. However, this is not the first time this was brought up. I brought it up, probably it was 2019. Maybe that was on that 203 East Santa Fe Avenue case where I pointed out to the city attorney and the city land use director and this board that again, that was the wording that you only could make recommendations and therefore your decision to allow something was invalid. Of course, just being me, I don't have any money behind me, so nobody actually paid much attention. I'm happy to see that Mr. Isaacson was actually doing something, but it wasn't, I don't think, a very public way of making that change. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Okay, any matters from the board? Yes.
Madam Chair, if I just may say one last thing on the last case and this discussion in the last case tonight. To your point, Madam Chair, Frank, I have a tremendous amount of respect for your work and and your expertise. And I genuinely believe that you care a lot about the work that you do and that shows. I want to kind of expand upon a point that Member Beachside made earlier, and I think I was trying to make in light of the discussion on the last case, and that is that we have a process here that is predominantly a public process where they're coming to the city and they are engaging preservation and planning professionals in interpretation of the code, in understanding their cases and in reviewing their cases, and then coming to the board here for public discussion. These are members of the Santa Fe public that are all volunteers that are representative of different points of view within the public. I am concerned when a kind of legal point of view becomes the dominant point of view here. If we were to only look at, if we were only to consider the code, we might as well have applicants come meet with attorneys and come sit before attorneys and judges, and that be the public process around design and preservation in our historic districts. So while I understand that there are many problems with the code, and I understand that there are many things that could be overlooked in staff's interpretation when the public comes in. I don't know that the time and place for it, for raising those issues and creating delays is in this room and during these hearings. And I think that with regard to the last case tonight, that discussion should happen outside of this room, either before the public or the applicant is allowed to proceed down a certain path, if that's possible, and if it's not, then it happens afterwards, and it gets saved to the next case. Likewise, to Member Beachside's point, this issue of the board not having the authority to rule on exceptions, as true as it may be, as true as it may have been raised 3 years ago, as true as it may be that Eli had not signed that issue, Member Beachhead's point that this caused significant distress to the public, to the amount of time we spend in this room, to this board, and the actions that we can take is undeniable. And I would think that in that case, if the board had been operating under precedent for so long, this issue could have continued that way, as it was done in 2019 when this was first noted, and behind the scenes, this issue be developed. And so to me, it's a question not of expertise. It's not a question of what's absolutely right or wrong. It's a question of posture relative to the work at hand of this board and of this division, and a question of fairness to the public, how these issues are raised and how they're put out there. That's all I have to say about that.
I might as well respond. Thank you, Madam Chair and Member Guida. I appreciate that, but I guess I just have such a fundamental disagreement with that point of view that I don't even really know where to begin. I mean, this is literally we are volunteers bound by an ordinance and by the law of the state of New Mexico. And you said, well, this should be precedent. Well, that is a legal issue, whether it's precedent. And what the city attorney is saying, and this is undoubtedly true, that is not precedent. That is not binding precedent. We would be literally acting ultra virus if the city attorney's interpretation of the code is correct, which it pretty obviously is correct. So the fact that it puts people out, the fact that people are inconvenienced, et cetera, is really irrelevant. We have to abide by the law. We have no choice in that matter. And the only way that would not be true is if you were correct in saying that, well, we've done it that way, so that should be enough. But it isn't enough. I mean, it honestly is not something that would survive a court of law. So that would mean that every single time we did that, we would be making a decision that could not be upheld. And that's just an impossible, I mean, the city attorney that would be a fireable offense not to prevent a city board from doing something that's unlawful. So I just don't see any room for grayness in this issue. We have no authority to grant these exceptions. We never did. Those are all appealable now, which is a huge mess. And I just don't see really anything further to discuss about that. We have to correct it. The city attorney's given the correct advice that we have to do that, and here's how we go about it, and here's what we need to do in the meantime. So as far as I'm concerned, that's case closed. And I just come back to the fact, and I think this might be worth, having the city attorney come talk to the board about not only this issue, but can the board disregard your advice? I'd like to have her advise the board on that issue, because I hear that we can, that you're just giving one opinion, and if we don't like it, we can disregard it. And I think the board needs to be advised on that issue. Because if that's true, I'm mistaken, but if it's not true, the board really needs to know that. So I would request that from the city attorney's office.
Member Benvenu, thank you for those comments. I tend to agree with you. I think that we have to be clear on, well, we have to listen to the city attorney. I mean, that is his job, and it is our job to uphold the ordinance. And naturally, we're human beings. We're going to interpret that ordinance sometimes in our own specific way. But we do have to listen, and we do have to make decisions. And I can understand what you two are saying, that you don't want to hold up the public, our fellow citizens. We all know, I know that I have been in those shoes, and it's a big drag when you are postponed more than once. But sometimes, like I said this evening, sometimes some projects call for that. I've been on this board a pretty long time, and when a project is postponed, they do have the opportunity, as much as you may not want to make the applicant go through this rigmarole and a postponement, but they do have the opportunity to make that project better. And it's actually better for them. Once they start exploring the possibilities that this board recommends, then they really do make a better project that the majority of this board recommends. That happens. Anything else? Anything further? Members?
Question about how are we handling previous approvals of exceptions? And when is the marker in time for doing things differently? Or I think you said maybe they're all appealable now, or
My view would be that anyone that's been denied an exception by us should go right to district court and say that was completely invalid. And vice versa, exceptions that have been granted.
Well,
Then the OSPA or whoever can appeal that on the basis that it was ultra virus. It's completely ineffective.
well, there are statutes of limitations and deadlines that have to be met. If somebody thinks that the board proceeded without authority, they would have a certain amount of time to appeal it to the district court, or to appeal it to the governing body, then appeal it to the district court. Once that timeline runs out, it's very, very difficult to try to get something overturned. So I don't think it's a realistic concern that everybody's going to challenge the decisions a board made in disregard for that section of the code. I can tell you that if you disregarded my advice, you would not be the first clients that have proceeded that I've ever had that proceeded in disregard for my advice. Okay. I mean, attorneys experience that all the time, and you advise your clients. Sometimes they do what you tell them. Sometimes they don't. The only thing I can tell you is that I am trying to avoid problems in the future. You make a bad decision now, it ends up on appeal. It ends up in district court. It ends up, there's an old saying, bad facts make bad law. So if it goes up to the Court of Appeals and ultimately to the state Supreme Court or higher, if somebody makes a federal case out of it and you proceeded in disregard for the code, it just becomes a big mess later. That's all I can tell you. I mean, I'm not going to go home and curse any of you or anything like that. I give you my advice. People followed my advice most of the time. Sometimes they don't. Right? I am just here to tell you, if we don't do what the code requires, it can become a big mess later. But all I can tell you.
Well, we're in the same boat because as an architect, people disregard my professional advice all the time too. So I'm happy to hear it's a common experience. Frank, I agree. And I think, I'm not an attorney, and these are, you're both right in acknowledging that these are, when it comes down to the code, there's a level of black and white, right and wrong, it either says it or it doesn't to these things. But we know that there are a million opportunities in the code to pick this thing apart, right? And we could do it. We could come in here every week or every 2 weeks and pick apart a different part of the code. And all I'm asking for is a mindfulness about supporting public process rather than. I agree with the point about not making problems down the road. Let's not make problems in the moment either if they don't need to be made. Is my larger point.
Just one last thought. I'm going to agree and disagree with Mr. Rebelade. I mean, I do agree that there's very little likelihood that decisions that have been made up to date, perhaps with the exception of the one that brought us to this situation, are going to be appealed on this basis. But to go forward after this has been publicly discussed as being something that we're not permitted to do would clearly put the city at jeopardy from multiple parties for having these decisions both litigated, which is expensive, and overturned, and potentially damages being awarded. So I do think there's a huge risk, but where I disagree on going forward, not so much going back, but where I disagree is the idea that we're just clients of yours and we can disregard your advice. We're not just clients of yours. We didn't hire you. You are active. We are volunteers that have been appointed to do a job, and we have agreed to be bound by the law. And I just can't agree with the idea that we're in a position where we can just say, thank you for your advice. I don't care. That's not the way I interpret the ordinance. And again, I would like to know if your boss would agree with that position. Because I think that's extremely important for any board, not just our board, to understand when when legal advice has been given. I don't even see the governing body disregarding the city attorney's advice,
Well, I didn't mean to.
let alone a volunteer board.
Well, I didn't mean to suggest you're free to do whatever you want to do. I'm just saying you're not the first. You know, if you disregard my advice, you're not the first client that will have disregarded my advice. I'm just saying, you know, please, I'm just trying to avoid a big mess in the future, which is what happens if we don't do what the law requires.
All righty. Anybody else? I do appreciate all your comments, board members. Because you are a thinking group. You don't just come over here and rubber stamp things. We have differing points of view, and I think that's important on a board. But anyway, thank you. And our next meeting is going to be on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2023. Yes, Heather.
And just one last thing from staff. First of all, I would like to say thank you because you all are very thoughtful and intentional in everything that you do. So like you say, I would like to thank the board as well for being so conscientious about the code and about listening.
They're thinking members. They don't just sit there.
So, and the other thing that I would just like to bring to the attention of the board is the consultant team will be coming for the zoning code update into town February 14th and 15th. They'll be here and they're going to be doing some interviews. We'll be reaching out to set up interviews. If you can't do it during that time frame, you know, you as the board, I don't know if you want to have some representatives, or we can do a meeting with those people who can come and meet with a consultant, or we can even do a one-off Zoom meeting if you prefer. But they will be in town the 14th and the 15th, and there'll be more to come on that.
Quickly, what is the preference of the board in reference to those meetings with the consultants? You want to do like a Zoom meeting? Or wait, if it's going to be 14, 15?
Yeah, it'd be
obviously not the
particular case. Yeah.
But obviously we wouldn't be doing it on the 14th, the day that we're having an H board meeting, correct?
That's correct.
So if people are available for the 15th.
And we can work out the details later. We can reach out and let you all know, but I'm just saying that also the consultant has offered, if that doesn't work, he's also willing to do, Matt Goebel is also willing to do just a one-off Zoom meeting for the entire board or what have you. So
What's the agenda for this meeting?
the agenda is just to understand, you know, sort of the overall changes that you would like to see to the section of a code that you are associated with, or even any other comments, but it's pretty open-ended. There's also scheduled on February 15th, an open house just to introduce to the public, you know, that we're doing this process. We've had articles in the paper and the, you know, city publications as well, but it's just an open house to sort of kick off the project.
So no work would have been done prior to this meeting? There's not been any groundwork laid yet? This would be an initial meeting?
So with a consultant, there's been a lot of work over, even before I started, I was attending meetings with current planning staff to go over all of the code as it is and just identify the problems because we use it every day, you know. And Angela was part of that. Carly was part of that as well when it comes to the historic districts portion itself. So we've given those recommendations to the consultant. But sort of like those big issues that you were saying maybe we should deal with later, they are going to be sort of part of a phase two. We're going to have a very robust community conversation about those bigger issues as it relates to the code.
You would
I'd be
want
happy
board
to
members to come forward if we do have a Zoom meeting to present the issues that we feel obviously are problematic within the ordinance.
Yeah, just some of the big key issues at this point, high level, because there's only so much that you can do in a 45-minute session. Matt Goebel also said that he was going to have sort of an agenda in advance or sort of typical questions, which I can share with the board as well. Daniel Alvarado is the one that's the project coordinator on this. And so I'm just sort of repeating an email that he sent to us and, just making you aware of what's coming.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd be happy to participate in that, but I think it'd be helpful to see what you've already provided to them
Oh, okay. We can put it
ahead of
to a
time. I mean,
Dropbox.
whenever, but ahead of time.
For the entire code or for?
No, just the historic, no,
Yeah.
just,
Oh,
just
the
our,
entire-
just our section.
But John, you're an attorney. You can
Right,
you
I
can look
don't
at
get
the
me involved
entire
in the
code.
rest.
I'm happy to share that.
Okay, anything else, board members? Nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Rita moves to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second, Beachside.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Aguilar Medrano,
Yes.
Member Berkeley, Member Beachside,
Yes.
Member Bienvenue.
Yes.
Member Guida.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.